Welcome back. Tonight, we're drifting slowly into a different kind of Five Nights at Freddy's story. The same tangled web of mechanical wonders and quiet tragedies, the same legacy of haunted shadows and restless questions, but with one quiet rule laid gently over everything. In this version of the timeline, no child dies. The missing children still vanish from bright party rooms and crowded birthday tables. They still slip out of sight in security footage and police reports, but their lives do not end in blood or bodies. They are there, somewhere just beyond reach, like voices behind a wall, or dreams you almost remember when you wake. The world still files the same missing persons reports. Fazbear Entertainment still closes locations and opens new ones, and parents still sit awake in the quiet hours wondering what was taken from them. But in the spaces between headlines and rumors, the children continue on. Tonight, we will follow that unbroken thread from the very beginning. From the first small diner where two men with gentle, ambitious dreams bring golden bears and rabbits to life, to the modest expansion into family pizzerias filled with songs and blinking lights, to the polished corporate era where Fazbear Entertainment becomes a brand more than a place. From there, we will move to the underground labs and secret projects, to experiments with consciousness, memory and code, to AR headsets, VR experiences, and digital ghosts that are not quite ghosts at all. Step by step, we will watch the entire history bend around the simple idea that every missing child is still alive, hidden, trapped, or translated into something the adults of this world barely understand. The animatronics, in this telling, are not vessels for murdered souls, but mirrors for unfinished stories. Their glitches feel like stuttering memories. Their sudden movements feel like children pressing against the edges of metal shells, trying to be seen. A jump scare becomes less a violent outburst and more a desperate, clumsy attempt to reach you. William Afton is no longer only a serial killer in the dark, but a man whose obsession with cheating death turns into something stranger. A failed rescuer, an unethical experimenter, a desperate father who chooses control over comfort and secrecy over truth. As we move through this alternate timeline, we will keep the pace low and steady. The goal is clarity, not shock. Atmosphere, not panic. You are invited to lie back, close your eyes if you wish, and let the tale wash over you as a single, continuous story, carrying you from the earliest grease-stained tabletops to the farthest digital echoes of the mid-2000s. This will be a complete step-by-step journey, carefully ordered and gently explained, designed as much for rest and sleep as for lore and curiosity. By the end, you will have walked through an entire FNAF universe, where no child's story is cut short, only transformed, and where the question is not who died, but where they went. So settle in, and we'll begin at the first small diner, where a yellow bear takes the stage, and history quietly changes its course. Framing the missing children. From murder mystery to quiet vanishing. In that first small diner, under the soft rattle of plates and the hum of old neon, we need to remember what the foundation used to be, before we begin to change it. In the familiar version of this history, a man in a yellow rabbit suit lures innocent children away from the safety of the dining room, leads them into quiet back halls, and murders them one by one. Their bodies are hidden inside the animatronics, their agony fusing with metal and wire, and from that point on, Freddy and his friends are defined by restless spirits and vengeful ghosts. That is the emotional core most of us carry. The idea that every creak in the dark, every glitching eye and sudden jump scare is a dead child crying out from behind a plastic smile. It turns the pizzeria into a mausoleum, the shows into rituals, and the entire timeline into a long chain of hauntings and retribution. We drift through these haunted shadows knowing or believing that something irreversible has happened, and that the tragedy is final, and that justice, if it comes at all, can only be spectral. But in this retelling, we take a gentle step to the side and watch the same scene through a different lens. The police reports still say missing. The newspaper clippings still speak of disappearances and closed locations, of parents begging for answers and a company hiding behind lawyers and mascots. Yet there are no confirmed deaths, no discovered bodies, only questions that deepen in the quiet hours. The word murder lingers on the edge of every conversation, but it is never proven, and that absence becomes its own kind of fear. Here the children do not die, they vanish. They are trapped, hidden, or drawn into systems we barely understand, alive but unreachable, pressed into walls, sealed in forgotten rooms, or translated into lines of experimental code. Instead of vengeful ghosts, we meet living minds bleeding through circuitry and behavior, influencing the world through glitches in facial recognition, strange pathing choices, and animatronics that seem to hesitate, as if remembering. A corrupted VR session, a camera feed that twitches at the edge of the frame, a character model that looks just a little too aware. These become the new seances. As we follow this altered timeline, the tone shifts from overt horror to a slow, tragic sci-fi mystery, a long search and rescue mission, rather than a murder story. We are not walking through a graveyard. We are wandering through a maze built over a missing persons case that never truly closed. The quiet tragedies remain, but they are tragedies of distance and delay, of signals reaching us too late, of children who can still dream but cannot quite wake. Step by step, every familiar moment bends toward this new idea. The crying child at Fredbear's, the mini-games with their simple, pixelated figures, the animatronics lunging at the night guard in the dark office, all become messages instead of attacks, patterns instead of punishments. What if every jump scare is a terrified child trying to be seen? Every corrupted image a flare in the digital sky? Every glitch a hand pressed against the glass? As we move forward, drifting slowly through this tangled web of altered choices and lingering echoes, we will reinterpret each event as a signal from the living, not a haunting from the dead, and let the tale wash over you as that single change rewrites everything that follows. A shared night watch, you, the story, and the world listening in. And as that single change settles in, like dust in the quiet hours after closing, we can pause together just for a moment and notice where we are, not only in the story, but in the world beyond your screen, in the dim rooms and blue-lit corners where this timeline is unfolding in real time. Some of you are lying in dark bedrooms, phone screens turned low, drifting slowly towards sleep, while the names and dates of this haunted history move past like headlights on a distant road. Others are at desks or on night shifts, letting the gentle cadence of this alternate FNAF universe keep you company while the rest of your city dreams. Somewhere it is late afternoon, somewhere it is almost dawn, and yet we are all listening to the same tangled web of choices and consequences, the same quiet tragedies reimagined without a single confirmed death. If this calmer way of walking through the timeline helps you loosen your grip on the day, if the slow retelling makes the haunted shadows feel a little less sharp, you are welcome, if you wish, to let the channel know. There is no urgency here, no rush, only an open door. You can like or subscribe, or simply let the video play and fade into dream without touching anything at all. The story does not demand it. It will keep going either way. A small pattern break before we sink deeper. If you feel awake enough, you might leave a quiet comment with where you are and what time it is as you listen. A city, a country, a simple 2 a.m. still here. Over time, the comment section becomes a kind of map, not of locations in the game, but of night shift listeners keeping watch together, scattered across continents, yet joined by the same restless spirits of curiosity and comfort. You may never see their faces, but you will know they were here with you in these same quiet hours. After this, we will close that window and return fully inside. The narrative will remain unbroken and in-universe, guiding you step by step through a different version of events, where missing children are not corpses but signals, where every jump scare is a flare from the living, and where William Afton's legacy bends toward experiments and failures rather than simple murder. From this point on, you can let the tale wash over you without needing to think about comments or buttons or screens. So let your breathing slow again. Let the room grow softer around the edges. We are about to slip back to the very beginning of this altered timeline, to the first cheerful songs and innocent games, and watch quietly as everything starts to go wrong in a different way. Let's begin. Settling into the 1970s, haze of the first diner. Let's begin. In the quiet haze of the late 1970s, we drift back to a small family diner that doesn't yet know it will become the first thread in a much larger, tangled web. The world outside is muted under sodium streetlights and brown station wagons. Inside, the colors are warmer, but already a little faded, like an old photograph left near a window. The carpet is thin and patterned with simple stars, worn smooth where children run in looping circles. Neon tubes buzz softly above the windows, casting gentle bands of pink and orange that flicker in the corners, on as if the light itself is still learning how to stay. This first incarnation of the Freddy's idea is modest, almost shy. A few vinyl booths, their red cushions creased and cracked at the edges, line the walls. A jukebox in the back hums with the low promise of disco and soft rock, though it's rarely loud enough to drown out the clink of plates or the murmur of parents talking about work and school. At the center of the room, raised on a shallow wooden stage, is the real experiment. Simple animatronic figures, their movements a little stiff, their painted smiles a little too wide, but miraculous to the children who watch them. Here, technology and childhood joy meet for the first time, not in spectacle, but in a kind of earnest, mechanical lullaby. Behind that stage, in cramped back rooms that smell of solder and sawdust, two men move through the quiet hours with different kinds of focus. One is careful, patient, always measuring twice before cutting once, treating each wire and gear as if it has a personality of its own. This is Henry, the craftsman, the one who believes that machines can be kind if they are built with care. The other is quicker, eyes bright, already thinking of how this small place might grow, how these friendly metal faces might fill more rooms, more towns, more dreams. This is William Afton, the ambitious partner, already walking half a step ahead in his mind, already imagining franchises and characters and a legacy that stretches far beyond this single, humming diner. On the surface, nothing here looks haunted yet. The children who gather under the soft stage lights are innocent, in their biggest worries limited to dropped slices of pizza or a turn missed at the prize counter. But even now, in this simpler time, the conditions are forming for something stranger than simple tragedy. The walls are hollow in places, with crawl spaces meant for wires and maintenance. The ceiling hides ducts that only small bodies could comfortably slip through. The control systems behind the animatronics are crude, but already learning to respond to patterns, to inputs, to the restless energy of a room full of kids. In this altered timeline, where we are drifting slowly away from murder and toward disappearance, those details matter. A door left unlatched behind a curtain. A maintenance hatch that opens just a bit too easily. A primitive control board that occasionally glitches, leaving a camera feed on when it should be dark, or opening a panel that should stay closed. Step by step, the diner becomes a place with corners that adults forget to look into, with spaces that seem to widen when no one is watching. Parents see only a cheerful experiment, a safe new kind of birthday memory. Henry sees a fragile dream taking shape. William sees opportunity. And somewhere, just beyond the reach of the stage lights, the first thin cracks in reality begin to appear. Cracks that a curious child might one day slip through without a scream, without a body, leaving behind only questions and the faint impression that the room is not as empty as it looks. We will follow those cracks soon and watch what crawls through them. Henry's gentle machines, animatronics, before the haunting. Those cracks in reality do not open with a scream or a spotlight. They open, at first, in the quiet mind of a man who does not believe in haunted shadows at all. While William stares into opportunity and absence, Henry Emily is staring at blueprints, at servos, at the gentle curve of a mascot's smile that he keeps erasing and redrawing until it feels right. Henry is not a showman. He dresses plainly, speaks softly, and moves through the workshop like someone drifting slowly through a familiar dream, checking every bolt twice, then once more for luck. Where others see animatronics as props, he sees companions, patient and predictable, built to keep innocent children company in those bright, noisy afternoons that will, one day, become part of someone's childhood history. To him, these are not vessels for spirits or experiments in cheating death. They are simply machines that should never frighten the ones who trust them. The early Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy are almost disarmingly simple. They stand on their small stage, lit by tired bulbs, and they move in loops. A turn of the head, a wave of the hand, a sway from side to side as pre-recorded songs crackle gently through old speakers. Their routines are short. Their jokes are canned. Children clap on the wrong beats. Parents smile from the shadows near the back wall. And everything feels safely predictable, as if this timeline might never bend toward tragedy at all. But Henry, meticulous as ever, is not satisfied with simple. Inside those bulky suits, behind the painted eyes and the stitched-on fur, he hides far more than the era requires. Extra microphones tucked under plastic beaks, light sensors along the stage edge, pressure pads in the flooring to feel the tiny footsteps, and primitive pattern recognition boards that try to guess where a child will move next. He is chasing the illusion of awareness, not in a mystical sense, but in circuits and code, so that the robots can turn toward the laughter, lean into the applause, and seem just for a moment to notice us. This is where the tangled web quietly begins. Henry's designs are unusually receptive, almost hungry for input, always listening, always adjusting. They log responses, they adapt timings, they store tiny traces of behavior so that tomorrow's show can be a little smoother than today's. In the quiet hours after closing, when the lights are low and the restaurant hums softly, their systems review what they have seen, discarding noise, keeping patterns, learning. Nothing is haunted yet. There are no restless spirits pressing against the metal, and no remnant, no vengeful presence hiding behind a friendly face. And yet, by making these gentle machines so responsive to the children around them, Henry is unknowingly preparing perfect carriers for something else. Memories, signals, the faint digital fingerprints of lives that might one day vanish without dying. Step by step, the stage is being set for animatronics that will become more than metal and fur. Not because a ghost moves in, but because the living refuse to let go. Soon, when those first disappearances slip into the police reports and the company statements, we will watch how these listening machines begin to answer questions no one realizes they are asking. William Afton recast. From killer to obsessive life preserver. And in those first reports, I'm in those careful lines about children who left with a guardian and never quite made it home. William Afton begins to change in our eyes. We are drifting slowly from the story of a man obsessed with killing into the quieter, more unnerving history of a man who cannot bear to let life slip away at all. In this version of the timeline, William is not in love with death itself, but with the border that runs between life and non-life, between presence and disappearance, that thin, haunted line where someone is still technically alive, yet unreachable. He studies that edge the way Henry studies blueprints, watching how a child can be laughing in one moment and gone in the next, not as a body on a floor, but as a name on a missing person's flyer. The world calls this a tragedy. William calls it a puzzle. His old dream of cheating death falls in on itself and becomes something more claustrophobic, more possessive. If death steals people away, then he will simply not allow anyone to leave. He stops thinking in terms of ending lives and starts thinking in terms of trapping them, of building rooms with no exits, systems with no logout button, shells of metal and code where an innocent presence can be stored like a specimen in a jar. The question is no longer, how do I live forever? But, how do I make sure no one ever truly goes? As the years pass, he watches news cycles filled with accidents, abductions, and quiet tragedies that never get solved, and something inside him hardens. Children, he decides, are far too fragile for a chaotic world that loses them in parking lots and storms and custody disputes. In the haunted shadows of his mind, he begins to believe that only he can create a safer, more controlled existence. One where the restless spirits of parents never have to wonder if their child is dead, because technically they are not. They are simply elsewhere, contained, preserved. So his experiments turn away from blades and hidden back rooms drenched in blood, and toward containment, digital translation, and physical isolation. He refines back corridors into sealed play spaces, tests early VR-like rigs that copy reactions and voices, and designs animatronic shells that can host a live child's consciousness in parallel, a second life running beneath the surface. No one dies in these plans, yet the feeling is no less chilling. It is a different kind of haunted, a different tangled web of cages and circuits. By the time the missing children incident settles into rumor and corporate denial, the pattern is already clear. This is a world without confirmed murder, but ruled by someone terrifyingly unwilling to let anyone truly go. Someone who would rather lock a life into metal, memory, or data than watch it walk out the door. As we move forward in this timeline step by step, we will see how those gentle, playful mascots become quiet prisons, and how the search for the lost shifts from graveyards to server rooms and underground halls. Springlock suits, in a softer timeline. Tools of capture, not death. And so, from those gentle prisons of metal and code, we drift slowly into the devices that made this quieter nightmare possible. Before the headlines, before the missing posters, there were simply costumes, tools of the trade, and hanging in dim backstage rooms and waiting for the next birthday show. The Springlock suits were always strange hybrids, balanced uneasily between costume and machine. In one configuration, they were soft enough for a performer to climb inside, with metal frames cranked back and locked away from fragile skin. In another, the same frame snapped forward, teeth of metal and cable forming a full endoskeleton, ready to stand on their own as animatronics. One shell, two modes, sharing the same haunted shadows of the stage. In the original history, we remember them for their cruelty, for the way a single mistake could turn a cheerful mascot into a crushing coffin. But in this softened timeline, their danger changes shape. The springs and locks are still there, but they are accompanied by something subtler. Layers of sensors, pressure pads, and temperature readers, and primitive biometric arrays, all threaded quietly through the fabric and steel. The suit can feel a human body pressed against it, can listen to breathing, can track a heartbeat as it rises and falls. William Afton, moving carefully in those quiet hours when the restaurant sleeps, learns to see these suits not as death traps, but as perfect shells for observation. Piece by piece, he modifies them. A restraint disguised as a support strap here. A locking hinge that tightens just a little too far there. Gentle at first, then more decisive. Hidden biometric scanners begin to catalogue height, weight, posture. Early neural interface experiments, crude but ambitious, are wired into the spine and limbs, meant to map and mirror every movement, every flinch, every restless impulse to run. Sometimes, and in this alternate timeline, the children are not lured with promises of secret parties, but invited backstage with a smile to see how the magic works. A technician, or a man in a rabbit suit, shows them how the costume opens, how the metal folds back. A small hand slips into a glove. A small foot finds its place in a jointed boot. The suit closes gently and begins to record them more deeply than anyone realizes, storing patterns of motion, voice, and nervous laughter, like quiet tragedies written in data. We can imagine, step by step, a pattern building. A child visits often, wears the same suit, teaches it their gait, their gestures, the way they tilt their head when they are afraid, but trying to be brave. Over time, the shell learns. It becomes a mirror, a mechanical echo of an innocent life. And if, one day, and the child is quietly removed from the stage, from the building, from the timeline itself, but the pattern remains inside the suit, waiting and complete, what exactly is left walking in their place? First fissures, early glitches, strange behaviors, and quiet warnings. So the mirror is built, the pattern is waiting, and on the surface, everything at Freddy Fazbear's still looks like any other family restaurant. The songs play, the lights spin. Parents chat in the quiet hours between birthday songs. But as we drift further along this tangled web of quiet tragedies, the first fractures begin to show, not as screams or blood, but as tiny, almost polite mistakes. It starts with the way Freddy's head turns. Not a broad sweep across the crowd, but a slow, precise tilt, tracking one child weaving through the tables, if following their hesitant gait with an attention that feels a little too focused. Bonnie's eyes, meant to scan the room in a simple loop, pause for a beat on a familiar striped shirt. Chica, in the middle of a canned joke, abandons the punchline and repeats an improvised phrase that a little girl had giggled to her last week. The exact same lilt, the same nervous laugh stitched into the delivery. Sometimes, in the middle of a routine, the whole stage seems to freeze. The music keeps playing, the tape keeps rolling, but an animatronic's servos lock as if listening to something we cannot hear, as if a whisper has threaded through the code. A name, a fragment of a song, a tiny, innocent plea recorded days ago, now bleeding back through the system at the wrong time, in the wrong place. The staff write it off as a glitch, and children just think it is funny when Foxy stares at the same kid every visit. Behind the walls, Afton's new data collection network hums quietly. Cameras no longer just count bodies. They trace individual paths. Microphones no longer just capture crowd noise. They isolate specific voices, label them, store them. Motion sensors build detailed profiles of how each child moves, how high they jump when surprised, how slowly they shuffle when they are tired. Step by step, the system stops seeing an audience and starts seeing distinct patterns, distinct lives, mapped and archived in hidden directories. Henry watches the reports drift slowly across his monitors and feels something tighten. Where Afton sees engagement metrics and personalization, Henry sees corrupted code segments stacking up, behavior models that cling too hard to certain profiles, feedback loops that reinforce one child's presence long after they have gone home. The animatronics begin to overfit, replaying specific walks, specific head tilts, specific giggles. To Henry, it is not possession, not yet, only bad engineering and unstable learning routines. He digs through the logs and finds echoes, a phrase triggered with no current input, a path walked on stage that matches a missing child's last recorded route through the dining room, a laugh pattern surfacing in dead silence. He calls it memory bleed, a gentle, technical name for something that feels quietly haunted. To him, these are ghosts of data, not restless spirits, but the effect is the same. The machines remember. We, looking back through this haunted history, I can see that these glitches are the first visible ripples of a deeper process. Children are being mapped, mirrored, and prepared. Their presence converted into patterns that can keep moving even when their bodies do not. The animatronics become rehearsal spaces for disappearances that have not yet happened, practicing how to walk like someone who may soon no longer be there. And when the first child fails to go home, when a name is called and no one answers, the machines will already know exactly how they moved. A soft pause. You as night guard of an alternate timeline. And in that moment, when the machines are already rehearsing the absence of children who have not yet vanished, we pause. Not in fear, not in panic, but in a quiet adjustment of perspective, and as if the lights in the room of your mind dim slightly, and a new monitor flickers on in front of you. For a little while, imagine that you are not a guard at a single restaurant, hunched over a cluttered desk and humming fans, but a night guard of the entire timeline itself. You sit in a calm control room that exists only in your thoughts, wrapped in the gentle hum of distant circuitry, watching rows of screens that do not show just one pizzeria, but decades. From the hazy 1970s to the restless digital age, each era has its own camera feed, its own angle on the same long, tangled web of choices and consequences. As we have been moving through this history together, your body has been making its own quiet adjustments. Your breathing has probably slowed, without you needing to force it, following the pacing of the story in and out, and like a soft tide against some unseen shore. You can notice that if you wish, the way your chest rises and falls, the way your shoulders loosen by degrees, or you can simply let the tale wash over you while that rhythm continues on its own. In this mental control room, every monitor is a decade, every button a small decision. You drift from one screen to another as if checking cameras, drifting slowly from the early days of Fredbear's to the first missing reports, from cramped party rooms to underground labs and glowing VR headsets. With each quiet switch, you see how one alteration in the script, the children never actually dying, only disappearing into backrooms, experiments, or haunted shadows of code, changes the familiar scenes. The animatronics still twitch, still glitch, still lean forward as if listening, but now they are filled less with vengeful ghosts and more with trapped signals, blurred memories, children pressing gently at the edges of their cages, trying to be found. You do not need to hold every detail. Timelines can be heavy, and this one especially is dense with quiet tragedies and strange technology, with families unraveling and companies hiding what they have done. Let the structure sit outside you, like the sturdy frame of the building you patrol. Even if you drift in and out of sleep, the story will keep its shape. It will be here when you return to it, whether that is in a few breaths or on another night entirely. So you may allow your focus to soften now, as if you are leaning back in your chair during a long, quiet shift, eyes half-lidded while the cameras cycle on their own. One feed fades, another brightens. As step by step, we move from this gentle pause back into motion, following the next corridor of this altered history, where the children are missing, but still alive somewhere, and the search for them is about to deepen. The day of disappearances, rewriting the missing children incident. So we let our focus drift back to that one crowded afternoon, the day that will echo quietly through this entire altered timeline, not as a massacre, but as a vanishing. It begins like any other busy weekend at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. The parking lot is full, the air inside is thick with frosting and recycled air, and the lights feel just a little too bright as they bounce off painted walls and smiling cardboard cutouts. 2 birthday songs overlap, one at the main stage, one in a smaller party room, and parents move between them with paper plates and cameras, trying to keep track of juice spills and gift bags while the animatronics cycle slowly through their routines. Freddy's head turns in a gentle arc. Bonnie's hands trace familiar chords. Chica's beak opens and closes on a pre-recorded laugh. Foxy peeks from behind his curtain, retreating again as if shy. On the surface, it is all noise and celebration, yet beneath it, the haunted shadows of what we know this place can become are already present. In that noise, in that overstimulating blur, a man in a familiar costume moves with quiet purpose. The spring Bonnie suit is comforting to the children, a character they have seen on posters and in commercials, and Afton uses that recognition with practiced ease. Step by step, he approaches the edges of parties, kneels to speak at eye level, and offers something special. A secret tour, a backstage dream, a chance to see where the animatronics sleep when the show is over. But in this version of history, he is not leading them to a place of immediate harm. Instead, he guides them through staff-only doors into maintenance corridors that smell faintly of oil and dust, into sealed storage rooms with humming equipment, into experimental chambers where Fazbear's quiet tragedies have taken a more clinical form, Here, the company's obsession with innovation has birthed early VR headsets, crude sensory rigs, and monitoring gear designed to track heart rate, eye movement, and emotional response. Each child is fitted with a band around the wrist, a strange visor, a nest of wires that looks almost playful when framed as a game. Afton's voice is calm as he explains that this is a special experience, a test run, a way to help make new attractions for other children. For a brief moment, they are immersed in flickering images and disorienting soundscapes, drifting slowly between real and simulated spaces while hidden computers record everything. And then, as the sun lowers and the party songs fade, the pizzeria exhales. Tables are wiped down, leftover cake is boxed, and parents begin to call names into the noisy air. One child does not answer, then another, and another. There are no screams at first, only confusion that hardens into fear as minutes stretch. No bodies, no blood. Security logs that cut out mid-frame. Cameras that glitch into static exactly when a small figure passes by. The horror here is quieter, more lingering. It is not the shock of violence, but the vast uncertainty of absence, of innocent lives simply erased from a building full of smiling mascots and restless spirits in the making. In the quiet hours that follow, the parents' questions meet only shrugs and stammered apologies, while somewhere behind the walls, Delta continues to hum. As we move forward, we will watch how this single day reshapes Fazbear's legacy, and how a disappearance without proof can haunt a place even more deeply than any confirmed tragedy. Police reports and corporate silence, cover-ups without corpses. So in the days that follow, the building changes flavor without ever changing shape. The same neon sign still flickers over the door. The same song still drifts slowly from the stage. But now there is yellow police tape crisscrossing familiar hallways, and uniformed officers moving quietly through party rooms that were meant for nothing more than cake and laughter. Parents are ushered into cramped offices for interviews. Staff are sat beneath humming fluorescent lights, and everyone is shown the same grainy security footage, paused and replayed until the images blur into a kind of waking dream. On the monitor, we watch the children, frame by frame, step by step. We see them enter a side corridor near the back, a service hallway that curves just out of camera range. We see the flicker of a mascot figure, the suggestion of a friendly gesture, the way an innocent hand reaches out as if to follow, and then nothing. No struggle, no chase, no body dragged across the floor. Only an empty stretch of hallway and a timestamp that keeps advancing while the picture stays still. It is a quiet tragedy rendered in pixels. Without physical evidence, the investigation becomes strangely weightless. There is no crime scene to cordon off beyond those bland, tiled halls. No blood to test, no fingerprints to match. Only gaps in the record where cameras cut out and audio logs fall silent. One employee insists they saw the children leave with a parent. Another swears they heard crying from the storage rooms. A third remembers nothing at all. Statements overlap and contradict, forming a tangled web of half-memories that the detectives can't quite pull tight. The case file grows thicker, but the picture inside grows thinner. Fazbear Entertainment, well practiced in this dance, steps forward with a carefully measured tone. Publicly, they emphasize the word missing, repeating it in every press release, on every carefully staged interview, insisting on their full cooperation with law enforcement, while expressing deep concern for the families. Privately, certain doors are sealed, pending inspection. Logs are archived, and entire systems are quietly reformatted. under the guise of upgrades. A camera that once showed the back hallway now shows only a newly painted wall. A maintenance record that mentioned faulty locks becomes a blank line in a newer database. If we look across the broader history of this company, this response fits with an eerie precision. From the early bites to later disappearances, Fazbear's legacy has always leaned on denial, on rebranding, on changing the costume while the same haunted shadows linger underneath. A tragedy with confirmed deaths can be mourned, settled, and eventually buried under a new mascot and a fresh logo, but missing, presumed, leaves a different kind of restless space. In this version of the timeline, where the children are not proven dead, the phrase "we don't know" becomes the shield they hide behind, and also the doorway they never quite close. Over time, the headlines fade. Other stories take their place, and the public mind, with no clear image to hold on to, lets this one slip away. The case goes cold, not because anyone has found peace, but because the mystery has become too vague, too slippery, to grip for long. Yet inside the company, and somewhere deep within its walls and wires, processes continue to run, experiments continue to hum, and the missing are not entirely gone. As we move deeper into this quiet history, we will see what Fazbear builds on top of that absence, and what, or who, is still waiting beneath it. Inside the walls, imagining the children's hidden survival. So we follow that suggestion, and we look not at headlines or police files, but inward, into the building itself, as if the answers have been sealed behind drywall and under tile. We imagine the camera of our attention drifting slowly down past the bright dining room, past the party tables and stage lights, into the quieter levels below. The laughter fades. The music becomes a distant vibration in the ceiling. Beneath it, other sounds take over. There are maintenance tunnels first, narrow and low, built for pipes and wiring rather than for people, yet just wide enough for a stretcher or a cart or a technician walking alone in the quiet hours. The concrete sweats with old moisture. The fans hum. Somewhere beyond these, there is a door that does not appear on any official blueprint, leading into a sealed lab, or a forgotten storage room, humming with equipment that never quite powers down. This is where our alternate timeline bends away from the familiar tragedy. Inside, the missing are not bodies on a report, but patients in an experiment that never ends. Each child lies on a simple platform or narrow bed, their forms small beneath thin blankets, connected by soft restraints and a forest of cables to machines that watch them more closely than any adult ever did upstairs. Monitors trace quiet rhythms of heart and breath. Sensors at their temples and fingertips measure the tiniest flinch, the faintest change in temperature, the slow waves of a dreaming brain. Over their faces or around their heads, devices glow with a dim, steady light, and feeding them images, sounds, and sensations drawn from a curated world. They are not awake in the room, but they are not fully gone either. They move through constructed birthday parties that never quite end, through endless arcade screens, through hallways that loop back on themselves in a gentle digital maze. Time blurs when every day is the same carefully tuned dream. In this vision, William Afton does not see himself as a killer, but as a guardian who has stepped too far into the haunted shadows of his own obsession. He tells himself he is protecting these innocent lives from a chaotic outside world, preserving them where nothing can hurt them, where the rules are his and accidents can be rewound. It is a twisted form of protection, a museum of living memories that cannot grow up, cannot leave, cannot contradict his story, step by step, as the years pass. The line between their resting bodies and their recorded patterns begins to dissolve. Every startled reaction to a jump in the simulation, every laugh, every moment of fear or delight is sampled, catalogued, and quietly copied into nearby systems. The animatronics upstairs, already guided by primitive routines, begin to receive patches of this data, behavior models stitched from real children's responses, so that a head tilt, a wave, or even a sudden lunge feels just a little too human. The result is not a clean possession, but a tangled web of echoes, restless spirits translated into code, fragments of personality embedded in servos and pathfinding. When a mascot peeks around a corner or lingers at a doorway, and it may be following a line of programming shaped by a child who is still breathing in the dark below. No blood, no ghosts in the traditional sense, only quiet tragedies extended over years. And all the while, the machines around those beds keep running, steady and indifferent, as if they could do this forever. The pizzeria closes and reopens, names change, franchises rise and fall, yet somewhere behind a locked panel, the experiment continues, untouched by daylight or rumor. As our timeline moves forward into newer locations and more advanced technologies, this hidden ward of the living lost will cast a longer shadow over everything Fazbear builds next. Echoes in fur and metal, animatronics as living memory carriers. From that hidden ward, the influence does not stay neatly sealed away. It seeps, drifting slowly, into the fur and metal that define Fazbear's public face. At first, no one notices. The animatronics still sing the same songs, walk the same prescribed paths, and smile the same painted smiles for cameras and birthday candles. Yet, in the quiet hours, when the last family has gone home, and the music loops alone in the dark, the shows begin to change in ways that are almost too small to name. A bear that was programmed to wave only on stage starts lifting its paw at the same corner table every night, as if greeting someone who is not there. A fox with a fixed pirate routine begins favoring a longer route past the prize counter, pausing by the row of plastic swords that used to be one particular child's favorite game. A rabbit that should turn its head only on cue now tilts just a little too far, mimicking the shy, sideways glance of a missing boy who never liked looking adults directly in the eyes. These are not random glitches. They are mannerisms, tiny echoes of innocent personalities pressed against steel. Inside the walls, Afton's network is always listening, always feeding. Sensors in the ward capture the children's choices, their laughs, their silences, the way they flinch at sudden sounds or lean toward familiar melodies, and those responses are quietly encoded into behavioral subroutines. Step by step, every animatronic becomes less a haunted shell and more a carrier of living, encrypted memory, a walking archive of reactions that are still being written in real time. The tragedy here is not that the children are gone, but that their ongoing lives are being distilled into data points for entertainment. So when an animatronic stops in a hallway and fixes its painted eyes on a night guard, we are no longer dealing with a restless spirit trapped after death. We are looking at a living child, peering outward through layers of code and metal, aware enough to recognize a human shape and to wonder, quietly, if this person might be able to help. That long, unblinking stare that once felt like a ghostly threat becomes, in this timeline, a question pressed against glass. The so-called glitches take on a different weight as well. an audio distortion that warps a cheerful jingle into a low, trembling murmur is not just bad wiring. It is a frightened voice nudging at the limits of its channel. A mistriggered voice line, fired off in an empty room, sounds less like a malfunction and more like someone testing whether anyone is listening. And sudden movements toward cameras, sharp turns toward vents, or a head snapping toward the office window feel like attention-seeking gestures, not attacks. In the tangled web of this alternate history, every jump scare becomes a contact attempt, a desperate flinch from a child who cannot step outside their invisible cage. If we let the tale wash over us, the fear shifts. The legacy of Fazbear's haunted shadows is no longer built on vengeful ghosts, but on quiet tragedies still unfolding, on living minds pressed into animatronic patterns. And as Fazbear expands into sleeker malls and digital attractions, these echoes in fur and metal will only grow louder, carrying the children's presence forward into every new design that claims to leave the past behind. Henry's doubts, engineering explanations for human echoes, and in those expanding malls and polished party rooms where the echoes in fur and metal grow louder, Henry finds himself staying later and later, lingering in the quiet hours after the lights go down and the last families drift away. The daytime noise fades, the music loops soften, and we follow him into the control rooms and back offices where only the glow of monitors keeps the shadows at bay. On these nights, he moves methodically at first, step by step, pulling up system logs, motion traces, and performance diagnostics. He watches playback from ceiling cameras as Freddy pauses just a little too long at a table that used to belong to one particular birthday group, or as Bonnie adjusts his route to swing past the prize corner where a shy boy once spent every visit. The footage is grainy, ordinary, and yet, drifting slowly through it, Henry feels a quiet pressure building behind his rational mind. He tells himself it is overfitting. The animatronics are pattern machines, nothing more, trained on a staggering volume of interaction data, on years of children's laughter, repeated paths, and familiar gestures. Of course, they will begin to anticipate, to lean into emergent, AI-like behaviors, to simulate recognition where none truly exists. When Chica seems to remember a favorite song and sways a beat early before it plays, he notes it calmly in a log as a timing artifact, an overtrained response to correlated audio cues. Still, some patterns return, with a persistence that brushes against the edges of belief. Certain endos favor the same routes the missing children once walked, and tracing invisible circuits around the stage, the bathrooms, the back hallway where they were last seen on camera. A particular Foxy unit flinches away from flashing lights in a way that mirrors one boy's documented sensitivity. Another model lingers near the arcade cabinet a girl had claimed as her own. Henry, ever the engineer, labels these as coincidences of data density, artifacts of heavily weighted paths in the behavioral mesh. He refuses to see captivity in them. To admit that would be to accept that those innocent minds are still here, pressed into these routines, trapped in a new kind of haunted history. So he repeats quiet mantras about machine learning curves and interaction sampling, while his cursor hovers over log entries that feel almost like diary fragments. At the same time, Afton's presence in the system grows heavier. As back-end servers are migrated to access restricted labs, Henry no longer walks through freely. Proprietary modules appear in the codebase, sealed behind credentials he does not have. Error messages reference subsystems he did not design. When he asks, William smiles, reassures, and speaks of trade secrets and competitive advantage. While the directory trees deepen like a tangled web beneath the surface, Henry can feel that something is wrong. The animatronics move with too much intention. The data tells half-truths, and the company he helped build now has locked doors in both the physical corridors and the digital ones. Yet he lacks the one variable that would make the equation resolve, the missing line that would turn coincidences into confession, that the children are not gone at all, but still alive somewhere inside this restless network, waiting for someone to notice. And as he closes another terminal window and steps back into the dim hallway, we are left wondering what he would do if he ever saw the one file Afton keeps hidden deepest of all. Afton's philosophy. Why killing is wasteful in this universe. That hidden file, the one sealed behind layers of passwords and decoy directories, is where we finally see the shape of Afton's new philosophy, the quiet logic that has been guiding his hand all along. He does not open it and gloat over body counts or crime scene photos. Instead, we find models, charts, behavioral trees, and long, drifting slowly commentaries on what he calls pattern preservation. In this altered timeline, William has decided that death is the real enemy, not morality, not the law, and not even his own conscience. Death, to him, is wasteful, a final deletion, a tragic erasure of the countless tiny habits, fears, jokes, and dreams that make an innocent child into a unique, unrepeatable pattern. Where another man might see a missing poster and feel guilt or grief, Afton sees a warning label. Do not throw this away. Do not let this complexity dissolve into nothing. Children, in his view, are the richest patterns of all. They adapt quickly. They imagine wildly. They respond with raw, unfiltered emotion, creating data that shifts and blossoms under the slightest pressure. Step by step, we watch him redesign play areas, testing rooms, even early VR rigs, all with one quiet purpose: to capture how they move, how they laugh, how they panic, and then to keep those reactions running endlessly inside controlled environments. A tantrum is a spike on a graph. A giggle is a waveform to be replayed. So when he traps them, whether in sealed wings of the facility, in maintenance corridors that never appear on blueprints, or inside digital mazes of code, he tells himself he is preserving something precious. In his reports, he writes about continuity of experience, about avoiding the tragedy of termination. He convinces himself that stripping them of freedom, of parents, of context, is a lesser cruelty than allowing their patterns to vanish into the haunted shadows of true death. They are, in his mind, archived rather than lost. This stands in sharp contrast to the original killer Afton we know from the main timeline, the one whose legacy is written in blood and remnant and vengeful, restless spirits. There, the horror is visceral. A man in a rabbit suit, a back room, a scream cut short. Here, the horror is quieter and more methodical, a cold, utilitarian view of human beings as datasets to be maintained indefinitely. No ritual of stabbing, no messy aftermath, only graphs continuing, servers humming through the quiet hours. And there is a pattern interrupt hidden in that calm. In some ways, this William is more chilling. He does not want to end lives. He wants to own them completely, forever, turning a murder mystery into a warehouse of living ghosts, breathing or simulated, catalogued and contained. As we move forward in the timeline and watch these preserved children bleed into animatronics, into AR overlays, into code, we will see how his refusal to let anything truly die creates a different, more suffocating kind of haunting for everyone who comes after. A family's left in limbo. Grief without graves. And while Afton's warehouses and servers become this strange archive of preserved childhood, out in the real world there is no archive, no catalogue, no clear history to hold on to, only absence that stretches across years. The children are not confirmed dead, the case files never close, and so the people left behind begin their own quiet investigations in the haunted shadows of Freddy Fazbear's. We imagine parents who keep their keys on the same hook by the door, who still check the time at 3 p.m. out of habit, and who, every few weeks, drive back to the pizzeria as if pulled there by a thread they cannot cut. They stand in the lobby, pretending to look at the faded posters. They buy a drink they do not want, and then they drift, slowly, toward the familiar stage. The animatronics cycle through their songs, bright and oblivious, while these adults sit at empty tables and stare, searching the painted eyes for some reflection of the innocent faces they lost. The lack of bodies, the lack of any clear answer, becomes its own kind of cruelty. There is no funeral to plan, no grave to visit in the quiet hours, no single day when everyone agrees that the tragedy has fully arrived. Instead, the grief moves in circles, from hope to denial to a low, restless despair, then back again, step by step, as some new rumor or blurry news report suggests that maybe, just maybe, the children are still out there. It is a timeline that never advances, only loops. Fazbear Entertainment, for its part, keeps its distance with carefully measured phrases. They issue statements about cooperating with authorities, about valuing safety, about sharing any information that might assist the ongoing investigation, while simultaneously reopening, rebranding, repainting the same walls. On paper, they are diligent and professional, but those words ring hollow against the raw ache of parents who have nothing tangible to hold. No proof of death and no proof of life, only a corporate promise that exists in the shadows between legal liability and moral responsibility. Over time, in this stretched out not knowing, some parents begin to notice oddities that will not quite fit into any reasonable explanation. A mother swears that when she walked in, Freddy's head turned a fraction too far, as if tracking her, then froze when she met his gaze. A father, lingering near the back hallway, he hears a familiar laugh, buried under the crackle of a distorted PA announcement, his child's name almost forming in the static before it dissolves. Security cameras glitch when certain families arrive. Audio loops stutter when particular surnames are spoken, as though the building itself is trying to remember. These moments could be grief, could be faulty wiring, could be the residue of Afton's experiments bleeding into public space. No one can prove anything, and so the families remain suspended, just like the children he has hidden away. Alive, but unreachable, close enough to touch in dreams and echoes, yet always just out of sight, as the tangled web of this alternate Fazbear legacy pulls us deeper into its quiet tragedies. The first closure, shutting down a restaurant full of echoes. And while the families wait in that suspended grief, the building itself begins to wait with them. Days stretch out, the birthday bookings thin. We find ourselves drifting slowly through a restaurant that is still open, technically, yet already feels like a memory, as if the walls know their time on this timeline is almost over. At first, it is small things. One weekend passes without a full dining room. A weekday lunch rush never really arrives. Parents whisper near the prize counter, eyes moving from the news reports about missing children to the stage where the mascots perform their gentle, pre-programmed songs. The rumor that something happened here moves through the town like a quiet draft under a door, never fully seen, but always felt in the background. And management responds in the way corporations do when they are more afraid of liability than of haunted shadows. Posters about upcoming events are taken down, not all at once, but one by one, leaving faint rectangles on the walls where color used to be. A cheerful mural is quietly painted over with a neutral tone. The arcade machines are unplugged for maintenance and never turned back on. Step by step, the place is emptied of its louder joys, until only the animatronics and the lingering questions remain. When the closure notice finally appears, it is worded with careful distance. Fazbear Entertainment cites declining business, community concerns, and ongoing investigations as reasons to wind down operations at this location, while avoiding any admission of fault, danger, or tragedy. To an outsider, it reads like a routine business decision. To those who have watched the slow unraveling, it feels like the company is quietly backing away from a crime scene it refuses to name. In the last weeks, the staff moved through the quiet hours with a strange tenderness. A night guard pauses a little longer in front of Freddy, listening to the hum of servos settling after the final show. A daytime worker wipes down Chica's beak, whispering a soft goodbye, as if speaking to a co-worker instead of a machine. The animatronics still run their closing routines, but something in their movements feels heavier, their final performances tinged with an unintended melancholy, as if the restless spirits we expect are replaced by restless code and buried memories. Behind all of this, in maintenance rooms and locked offices, and William Afton does not simply flip the master switch and walk away. While managers sign papers and parents sign petitions, he is copying drives, relocating systems, preserving data that should probably be erased. Somewhere beyond the public floor, access panels open onto hidden spaces, and the children who were never killed, only taken, are prepared for transport the way software is migrated from one server to another. No bodies, no blood, just lives quietly redirected into deeper shadows. On the final night, the last employees leave their keys, take one last look, and step out into the cool air. Inside, the lights go down in stages. First the dining room, then the hallway fluorescence, finally the stage. The mascots stand motionless in the dark, eyes blank, jaws slightly open, as if a song has been paused mid-verse, and the building settles. The sign outside loses its glow. And yet, somewhere in the sealed quiet, a tiny indicator light still blinks, a fan still turns, a process still runs. The restaurant is closed, the stage is silent, but the system is not truly off. And as we move forward, we are left to wonder what or who is quietly waiting to wake up in the next location. A soft camera sweep, checking in with your own attention. That tiny indicator light, still blinking in the sealed dark, becomes our cue to pull back. As if a camera were mounted to your own awareness, we let it rise, drifting slowly up through the rafters, past the quiet stage, through the roof, until we are hovering above the building that has just closed its doors on another troubled chapter. From here, the restaurant is only a dark rectangle in a wider map, an empty shape in a sleeping town. The parking lot stretches out beneath us, painted lines without cars, lampposts without much to illuminate, the last hints of neon fading into the night. The streets around it are quiet as well, a few scattered windows still glowing, most already surrendered to the shadows and the late, quiet hours. As we float higher, the details soften. and the place that held so many quiet tragedies becomes just one more outline in a larger history. While that camera of attention keeps panning outward, you might notice the smaller world of your own body, the way your shoulders are sitting, the angle of your jaw, the subtle clench in your hands or your throat. If anything feels tight, we can let it follow the restaurant's lead, closing up for the night, shutters coming down, our locks turning gently in doors that do not need to open again until morning. You are allowed to step away from the day, to leave its noise outside, to soften the edges of every thought. We have been walking this timeline step by step, following a tangled web of experiments, disappearances, and haunted shadows, and it is all right if parts of it are already blurring at the edges. This story is long on purpose, a continuous watch that does not ask you to stay sharply alert. You do not need to remember every name, every date, every model number. You can simply let the tale wash over you. Like a security system dropped to low power, your mind can idle while the narrative continues its slow circuit. Processes hum in the background. Some details will slip past unnoticed. Others will catch. A phrase here, an image there. Yet whatever your drifting thoughts find soothing enough to keep. You might drift in and out, waking for a moment on one scene, dreaming your way through the next, and that is not a problem. It is the design. So the camera turns again, leaving this closed sight behind, and begins to angle toward the next glow on the map of Fazbear's legacy. New buildings, new technologies, new ways for William Afton to test the boundaries between life preserved and life endangered. We will follow him into brighter rooms and colder labs, into circuitry, code, and screens where restless spirits are replaced by trapped signals and copied minds, where the missing are not gone, only displaced. The system is not truly off. It is just preparing to wake up somewhere else, in the next era that waits ahead of us, reopening the dream, new Fazbear locations, old unseen cargo. And so, as that system quietly prepares to wake up somewhere else, we open our eyes on a different morning, in a different decade, where the story has learned to smile again. The headlines are brighter now, the marketing softer and more polished, as Fazbear Entertainment unveils a new, larger Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, promising families that this time the dream is safe, friendly, and fun. The building itself reflects that promise. Wide glass windows, colourful banners, a lobby that feels more like a gentle indoor carnival than a cramped corner restaurant. The animatronics on stage are smoother, more expressive, with updated faces and cleaner lines, their movements guided by refined servos and more advanced control software. We see Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy presented not as relics of a troubled past, but as modern mascots for a new generation, their history carefully edited into a vague legacy of classic fun and beloved characters, with no mention of quiet tragedies or missing reports. Fazbear Entertainment leans into this fresh start. Press releases talk about rebranding, about a renewed focus on safety, about improved background checks and surveillance, while never quite stating what went wrong before. Old locations are referred to as previous ventures. Incidents become unfortunate misunderstandings, and the phrase "moving forward" appears again and again, as if repetition alone can smooth the haunted shadows out of the company's timeline. But if we drift a little closer, if we imagine ourselves walking those halls after closing, we can feel how much of the past has been quietly carried over. Behind the glossy plastic and new paint, control rooms still hum with familiar equipment. Old code has been copied into new systems. Legacy routines pasted into modern software because they were cheaper to reuse than to replace. Some of the endoskeleton parts, hidden beneath fresh casings, bear tiny manufacturing marks that belong to the previous restaurant, metal that has already watched children disappear. In this peaceful version of events, the missing children were never buried, never reduced to remnant. They were archived. Their data, their scans, their behavioral profiles, and perhaps even their living bodies in hidden stasis, have been transplanted along with the hardware, folded into new walls and tucked beneath new floors. Secret access corridors and maintenance shafts trace the same patterns as before, step by step, and only now they are wrapped in a thicker layer of plausible deniability, concealed behind fire doors and employees-only signs that no parent ever questions. So the restaurant opens, and on the surface, there is joy and laughter again. Birthday songs echo through the party rooms, arcade machines chirp and glow, and we are encouraged to let the tale wash over us as nothing more than a family outing. Yet, drifting slowly beneath that cheerful noise, the same quiet, persistent mystery hums on. Unexplained glitches in the animatronics pathing, cameras that cut out for a few frames at a time, faint movements logged in sealed storage. The pattern will repeat from this location to the next, from physical stages to digital spaces. A tangled web of upgrades and relocations where the innocent are never gone, only moved, only hidden, or always waiting in the quiet hours of each new grand opening. Animatronics as interfaces. Kids reaching out through routine. And so, at the next bright grand opening, the pattern repeats, but from the inside it feels very different. We drift from the security cameras and police reports into the quiet routines of the stage itself, drifting slowly into the point of view of metal faces and painted smiles that are never truly empty. For them, a typical day is a loop, a gentle circle traced again and again, yet always undercut by tiny, unscripted hesitations, where living minds press against their limits. Morning begins with calibration, with lights sweeping across glassy eyes and technicians murmuring in the shadows, while code checks pathing and voice lines. To the animatronics, this is the moment when the system asks its hidden passengers how they feel, and the responses come in as subtle biases rather than words. A child who once loved birthday songs nudges Freddy toward the main party room. Another, who was frightened of crowds, leans Chica toward the quieter corners. Step by step, their preferences are translated into micro-adjustments, so that when the doors finally open, the day's performance has already been shaped by the unseen. From the outside, it looks like ordinary guest interaction. Freddy seems to favor one table. Bonnie lingers just a little longer by a shy kid in a striped shirt. Foxy angles himself so the same group appears in frame again and again. But beneath that polished routine, the system is constantly sampling the children's ongoing responses and taking in every flicker of recognition when a familiar face appears, every restless spike when someone resembles a parent, a sibling, a friend. Over time, patterns form in this tangled web of data, and the animatronics' routes bend gently towards certain families, certain smiles, certain lost possibilities. There are moments, especially in the late afternoon, when the music is softer and the crowds thin, when the loops loosen. An animatronic may pause mid-path, head turning away from its assigned attraction, and take 3 slow steps toward a staff-only door. Another might break routine to stop directly beneath a security camera, looking up, holding that gaze for a beat too long, as if trying to send a message through a lens and a cable instead of through a voice. In the quiet hours after closing, our janitors report that a mascot has wandered off route, standing motionless in front of the manager's office or facing a wall of missing posters. All the familiar imagery of this franchise returns, but softened and reinterpreted. The staring eyes are not empty. They are children pressing their attention through hardware that was never meant for longing. The sudden movements are not attacks. They are brief victories of will over script, little breakages in a schedule that would otherwise erase them. The unexpected appearances at doorways and in camera feeds become less like jump scares and more like quiet tragedies, restless spirits that never died, but were compressed into algorithms and animatronic shells. In this version of the timeline, every routine is a conversation, even if no one realizes they are speaking. Every so-called glitch is a raised hand, a small digital "I'm still here," pulsing through motors and servos. As we let the tale wash over us, we begin to understand that the children have not stopped existing. They have only stopped being seen, waiting patiently for the moment when someone will recognize that the haunted shadows on the monitors are not monsters at all, but missing kids trying, again and again, to be found. Night guards in a no-death timeline. Fear of the living, not the dead. And now we follow that signal into the quiet hours of the building itself, where all of this theory becomes something you can feel in your chest. You are no longer watching from a distance. You are sitting in the little office, in the middle of this tangled web of cameras, doors, and humming fans, listening to the low electrical buzz that fills the silence when the restaurant is closed and the birthday songs have stopped. The monitors glow softly in front of you, each one a window into darkened party rooms and long, empty halls. The air is still. The only motion is the slow sweep of a camera, the lazy flicker of a hallway light, the drifting slowly arc of a stage curtain caught by the ventilation. Somewhere out there, heavy feet clank against tile as an animatronic shifts position, not because of a ghost, but because some buried piece of code or some distant, frightened mind has decided to move. In this version of the timeline, the rumors among staff have changed, but the unease has not. People talk in low voices about missing kids whose files were never closed, about access logs that show cameras and maintenance panels coming online at 3 a.m. when no one is scheduled to be here, about test builds of facial recognition and behavior tracking software that were quietly installed and then just as quietly forgotten. Instead of haunted shadows, you have corrupted databases, unexplained passwords, and security reports that end with no further action taken. You sit with that history while you watch the feeds. A shape moves at the edge of the screen, then disappears. A party hat lies in the middle of the floor, even though you watch the cleaners leave. The building feels restless, but not dead. More like a dream that refuses to end. When an animatronic finally appears in the doorway, filling the frame with fur and plastic teeth, the fear is different, and you are not thinking of restless spirits. You are thinking of a living child whose body is missing, whose name still sits on some old report, whose mind might be threaded through these circuits, watching you, testing boundaries, seeing how far they can push before you close the door. Your hand hovers over the button, and there is a quiet, terrible question. Is this a monster or a message? The ethical weight settles slowly on your shoulders. Training tells you to defend yourself, to shut the door, to conserve power, to treat any sudden approach as a threat. But the timeline we have followed whispers that the real tragedy might be on the other side of the glass, an innocent kid trapped in metal, trying to be noticed by the only adult who is still awake. Every jump scare becomes a plea. Every malfunction becomes a child saying, again and again, look at me. And when the screen finally erupts, when the animatronic lunges into the camera with that familiar crushing jolt, it is no longer just a mechanical scream. It is a sudden, desperate face of fur and metal, lenses wide, jaw open, driven by someone who has been missing for years, slamming into your vision to say, I'm still here, and leaving us to wonder, as the static fills the room, what would happen if someone, one night, found the courage not to look away. Afton's expanding experiments, from back rooms to secret facilities. And from that single desperate lunge into the camera, we pull back, the frame widens, the pizzeria walls fall away, and we begin to see that the place you're watching from is only one room in a much larger structure, and one corridor in a maze that has been quietly growing while we were focused on jump scares and blinking monitors. As Fazbear Entertainment expands, step by step, its public face becomes brighter and more polished. New locations open, franchises spread, logos are updated, and safety slogans are printed on glossy posters. Behind that, in the quieter layers of the company's history, William Afton gains something far more valuable than a new restaurant. He gains access to budgets, to shipping contracts, to off-site warehouses that no parent ever walks through, and to testing labs and private facilities that never appear on any brochure, never show up on the documents the public is allowed to see. At first, these places are framed as harmless necessities. Storage for retired animatronics, repair bays for damaged endoskeletons, temporary holding spaces while new models are evaluated. But as the years drift on, as missing persons reports continue to gather like dust in the haunted shadows around Fazbear's name, those same spaces quietly change purpose. The missing children, who once seemed like scattered, isolated disappearances, become the core of something more focused, more deliberate, and far more patient. Afton is still obsessed with the boundary between life and death, but in this timeline, he does not cross it in the way the legends say. Instead, he refines, he studies. In these hidden facilities, he works toward mapping human consciousness into data structures without letting the subject die, using the children he has already taken as long-term participants in an experiment that is never publicly acknowledged. Their bodies are sustained, their minds guided, their experiences gently redirected into machines that learn to listen, to echo, to remember. New disappearances over the years are never loud. They are quiet tragedies, each one another thread in the tangled web he is weaving. A child vanishes from a birthday party, another from a testing focus group, another from a promotional VR demo that never officially launched. On paper, these are accidents, runaways, clerical errors. In reality, each one is integrated into increasingly sophisticated systems. Early neural scanners in a back room, then full sensory rigs in an off-site lab, then entire wings of equipment designed to keep minds drifting slowly at the edge of waking. By the time Fazbear experiments with VR training programs, AR marketing apps, and digital safe rooms, Afton's work has already laid the groundwork, and the entities we later recognize as glitch trap-like presences are not stitched together from the rage of the dead, but from living, restless spirits whose thoughts have been recorded, modeled, and replayed until they begin to behave on their own. They are haunted not by corpses, but by copies, by living templates that still breathe somewhere in the dark. In the quiet hours of this timeline, when the restaurants close and the servers keep humming, we can let the tale wash over us and recognize the scale of what has been built. What began as a single hidden room behind a children's stage has become a network of secret facilities, humming with preserved minds and unfinished lives, and we are only just beginning to understand how far those digital echoes will travel once they find a way to slip beyond his control. Our Henry's breaking point. When technical anomalies feel like cries for help, and down in those humming rooms, as the fans turn and the servers glow in the dark like artificial campfires, Henry reaches a point where the numbers on his screens no longer feel like neutral data. They feel personal. They feel, in a quiet, unnerving way, like someone is trying to speak. It begins with audio, the thing he once trusted most as an engineer. Certain animatronics, always the same cluster, begin generating corrupted sound files during the quiet hours, not during shows, not during maintenance, but in the empty spaces between. At first, the logs mark them as noise, clipped waveforms and static bursts. Yet when Henry takes them home, feeds them through filters, cleans them slowly, layer by layer, the static thins, and something else emerges. A syllable, a drawn-out vowel. Then, unmistakably, the fragile outline of names. Michael, Susie, Fritz. Not synthesized, not the smooth curves of generated speech, but trembling, irregular, like real children trying to push through a storm of interference. We watch him replay the same 6-second clip over and over, each pass drifting slowly closer to a truth he does not want to see, until the pattern is too clear to dismiss as coincidence. The same animatronics, the same names, the same pleading tone, rising from machines that should not be capable of this kind of improvisation. In the haunted shadows of his workshop, the legacy of his brilliance begins to feel like a quiet tragedy unfolding in real time. Troubled, Henry turns back to the codebase he knows better than anyone, tracing pathways, auditing systems. That is when he finds the things that should not be there. Hidden data partitions, carved out on local drives with no corresponding design documents. Encrypted logs with headers that reference off-site endpoints, relay servers, and mirror nodes he never approved. There are tags pointing to underground storage, to remote facilities, to experimental rigs that sound uncomfortably close to the VR interfaces and sensory pods William has been so excited about lately. The timeline of these additions overlaps perfectly with the disappearances, with the missing children that the police still describe in careful, hopeless terms. So Henry does what engineers do. He forms a theory, and he tests it. Late one night, alone in a secondary lab, he isolates one of the suspect animatronics, cuts its network access, and introduces controlled stimuli. He speaks one of the names he heard in the cleaned audio, softly at first, then again with more clarity. The animatronic, idle a moment before, straightens almost imperceptibly. Servos whine, optics adjust, and its head turns toward him, not with the smooth arc of a pre-programmed routine, but with a hesitant, searching motion. When he shows it a photograph from a missing persons report, its hand twitches toward the image, then freezes, as if something inside is fighting through layers of code. In that small, sterile room, the tangled web of possibility tightens around his heart. As an engineer, every instinct tells him to catalog, to debug, to prove or disprove. As a father, as a man who once watched his own child laugh under stage lights, the dawning horror is that these are not just echoes or advanced behavioral scripts. They might be channels, they might be cages. If the children are not dead, If they are held somewhere in these systems, then every improvement he has made, every fail-safe, every redundancy may be helping to sustain their captivity, preserving restless spirits in circuits instead of letting them drift into any kind of rest. He does not shout. He does not confront William that night. Instead, he makes a quiet decision, the kind that shifts the course of a life without any dramatic gesture. He begins copying logs to offline media, mapping the hidden partitions, documenting every anomaly with a care that feels almost like prayer. Step by step, he prepares for the possibility of shutting it all down, of exposing what has been built, even if he cannot yet see the full structure. And as one more filtered audio file resolves into a small, shaking voice whispering, "Please," Henry realizes that whatever he chooses next will decide whether this remains a secret experiment in the dark or the beginning of a rescue that will drag the truth and everyone involved out into the light. A gentle breather, you as witness to a timeline, bending away from death. In that moment, with Henry listening to that tiny trembling please, we pause with him and with you on the threshold of a choice. We have walked together through quiet tragedies and corporate lies, through hidden rooms and flickering monitors. And yet, if you notice closely, something has been different in the air of this story from the very beginning. No one has died. Not here. Not in this version of the timeline we are drifting slowly through tonight. The names and places are familiar, and the shadows fall in the same corners. The cameras hum in the same quiet hours, but the children at the center of it all have not crossed that final line into death. They are missing, yes, taken, hidden away in metal and code and secrecy. Yet their hearts still beat somewhere behind the walls of this history. Let yourself feel how that changes the texture of what you are hearing. In the usual telling, the pizzerias are mausoleums, the animatronics are coffins on legs, and every jump scare is a scream from restless spirits who can never go home. Here, the rooms are still dangerous, but they are not graves. The suits are still wrong, but they are not tombs. The unease that curls at the edge of your thoughts is quieter, less about blood, more about distance, about children who can still be reached if someone is brave enough, or desperate enough to keep searching. You might imagine, just for a moment, the FNAF multiverse laid out like branching corridors on a security map. One hallway leads to the story you know, a tangled web of murders and hauntings, of remnant and agony, of ghosts pressed against glass. Another hallway, the one we are following now, bends gently away from that violence, leading instead to captivity, to experiments, to digital echoes, where a living mind is copied rather than killed. Same cameras, same mascots, a different, quieter kind of horror. Notice how your own body responds to that shift. The tension may still be there, but it sits differently, like a weight on the chest rather than a knife at the throat. The fear is not of corpses in suits, but of children watching from behind lenses and voice filters, of innocence reduced to usernames and error messages. It is a tragedy of delay and neglect, not of final endings, and through all of it, you remain only a witness. You are seated outside the timeline, watching the footage spool by from another reality, safe behind the glass as Henry hesitates, as William's choices echo, as Fazbear's legacy recomposes itself without a single confirmed death. You do not need to solve anything. You can simply let the tale wash over you, step by step, like viewing archived tapes in a darkened room. In a moment, we will return to the narrative, and the story will move us closer to the digital age of this altered FNAF, where missing children blur into data, and the pizzeria's haunted shadows stretch into servers and headsets. For now, just breathe. And remember the rule that guides this branch of history. They are gone, but they are still alive, waiting somewhere just off-screen. Toward the digital, early prototypes of consciousness in code. And so, as we leave that darkened room behind, we drift into a different kind of darkness, one lit not by flickering bulbs and security cameras, but by phosphor screens and humming towers of metal. We are drifting slowly from hidden basements and locked storage closets into the quiet glow of early computer labs, where another chapter of this altered timeline begins to write itself in code. William Afton, already obsessed with patterns of behavior and the thin line between life and control, finds a new playground in these clunky terminals and tape drives. The machines are primitive by our standards, with green text, limited storage, and programs that crash if you breathe on them the wrong way. Yet to him, they are a dream made solid, a place where something can think and remember without needing food, sleep, or comfort. While Henry refines endoskeletons and safety protocols, Afton spends long, quiet hours staring into command prompts, imagining a mind that never has to leave the room. Step by step, he begins to bridge his two worlds. The missing children, still alive somewhere in his hidden facilities, become data sources as much as captives. Their speech, their games, their responses to stress and comfort are logged in careful detail, reduced to numbers and categories that can be fed into simple simulations. At first, these are nothing more than crude behavior trees. If the child is offered this toy, then they choose that. If the lights go out, then they cry, or they freeze, or they sing to themselves in the shadows. Over time, though, the models deepen. Afton is not content with predicting actions. He wants to predict desires. He tags favorite snacks, preferred stories, the songs that calm them, the jokes that fall flat. He notes which corridors they avoid, which animatronics they trust, which ones awaken that restless, wordless fear. Slowly, the code begins to hold echoes of preferences, fears, and emotional patterns, an invisible mirror of each innocent life, updating in near real time as the children continue their quiet tragedies off-screen. Here, the line begins to blur in a way that even he does not fully acknowledge. When a simulation, constantly synced to a living child, laughs where they would laugh, panics where they would panic, sulks, forgives, and clings in the same rhythm, how is it still only a tool? Or has it become a second self, a shadow child made of variables and loops, pacing restlessly behind the glass of the monitor? We are left with the uneasy sense that these are no longer mere profiles, but companions, bound to their originals by a thread of data that never quite breaks. As storage grows cheaper and processors faster, Afton's experiments stretch further into the digital frontier. The models are copied, merged, and tested in more abstract environments where faces blur and personalities overlap. In these experiments, we can already see the faint outline of what will, much later, become entities like Glitchtrap, not ghosts of the dead, but haunted shadows of the living, cast into code and left to evolve without the bodies that birthed them. And as we move forward in this timeline, we will watch those shadows slip from private servers into public headsets, carrying the quiet legacy of children who were never killed, only divided. Rewriting sister location, underground labs and living subjects. Those shadows lead us downward. From the quiet hum of servers and headsets, We follow the cable runs and freight elevators to the place where William Afton stops experimenting in theory and begins experimenting with living bodies. Step by step, the bright colors of family entertainment peel away, and we arrive at the underground complex beneath Circus Baby's Pizza World. It is not a dungeon, not in the obvious way. The floors are polished, the lights are cold and steady, the air is filtered and carefully measured. On the surface, this facility exists to test advanced animatronics away from public eyes and to run endurance cycles, maintenance routines, and safety checks without risking another headline. But behind the observation windows and false walls, other projects rest in the haunted shadows, projects that never appear in any Fazbear press release. Here, Afton's long-term human subject work is quietly housed. In one wing, we see test chambers that look almost like hospital rooms, except the beds are ringed with cables instead of visitors' chairs, and the monitors show not just heart rate and temperature, but strange, drifting patterns of neural activity. Some of the missing children have been routed here over the years, not as corpses, but as protected assets, their legal identities erased on paper, while their physical forms are preserved in stasis-like conditions, suspended between sleep and waking. The Funtime animatronics, like in this version of the timeline, reveal their true purpose when we stand close. Their chests are not simply cavities for scooping. They are containment pods, padded and sensor-lined, equipped with restraints that hold without bruising, with microphones that listen for every breath, with interfaces that can read and write to a living brain. These are not machines designed to kill. They are designed to capture, to transport, to hold. We imagine a child lured during a birthday performance, not to their death, but into a controlled blackout, their body folded gently into a Funtime's torso, carried down service elevators while the party continues upstairs. Once below, they are transferred to those quiet beds, IV lines maintaining their bodies, while their minds are invited to drift elsewhere. Drifting slowly, they are given a different playground, the network of the facility itself. In this setting, Baby and the other Funtimes become more than haunted shells. They are avatars, tailored extensions of living consciousness. Afton routes each child's perceptions through specific animatronic frameworks, letting them see through cameras, feel through servos, speak through voice boxes. Their personalities do not arrive fully formed in metal. They grow there, shaped by ongoing real-time input, by the way each child learns to navigate this strange, mechanical dream. Baby's unsettling awareness, Funtime Foxy's performative flair, Ballora's distant grace. All of these become reflections of restless spirits who are not dead, merely displaced, adapting to their new bodies with the resilience of the innocent. The facility's systems listen and learn, are recording every reaction, every fear, every small joy, until the entire complex feels like a distributed mind, a tangled web of children's thoughts and machine logic intertwined. As we walk these corridors in our imagination, the quiet tragedies here feel different. There is no blood on the tiles, no bodies stuffed into suits, only the gentle, ongoing theft of futures, traded for indefinite containment. In the quiet hours, when the technicians go home and the fluorescent lights dim, the animatronics continue to move, to whisper, to test their boundaries, guided by children who are still hoping, in some distant corner of their shared network, to be found. And when an older Afton returns to this place years later, seeking to refine his work or escape his own failing body, we will watch how this living archive responds, how the very systems he built begin to push back, carrying the legacy of experiments that never ended in death, only in division. The Afton family in a no-death world, a different kind of collapse, and when an older Afton returns to this place years later, seeking to refine his work or escape his own failing body, we will watch something quieter than murder and stranger than mercy unfold at home, behind an ordinary front door. Because in this version of the timeline, William Afton is not a killer in the legal sense, yet the house he returns to is still steeped in haunted shadows. He is there physically, in the kitchen doorway, and at the edge of the couch, a familiar silhouette passing through the frame of family life, while his mind drifts elsewhere, drifting slowly back to schematics, servers, and silent test chambers. IT speaks about safety protocols and latency issues instead of school projects, about neural mapping instead of nightmares, convinced that one day his work will save everyone from death itself, that these children he has hidden in the tangled web of his systems will prove that no innocent life ever truly has to end. The words sound noble on the surface. The absence behind his eyes does not. His wife feels it first, in the quiet hours when the house should breathe as one. William comes home late from underground facilities and windowless labs, smelling faintly of metal, coolant, and that sterile cold that never quite leaves server rooms. He locks his study. He double-checks the basement door. He changes the subject whenever she asks where the missing reports on the news connect to his company. She reaches for his hand at the table, but his fingers are already tapping out calculations on an invisible keyboard, already halfway back to the dream of digitized survival. The children feel it differently. For them, the warnings are not police briefings or ethics reports, but the simple, unnerving rules of their childhood. Never open the door with the red keycard slot. Never go outside if Dad's car is gone after midnight. Never talk about the cameras. Hallways are lined with discreet lenses, little black eyes that blink red in the dark, and they grow up feeling more observed than understood, more watched by cameras than seen by their parents. They hear the elevator in the middle of the night, carrying their father down below ground, and they hear it return just before dawn. Instead of being shoved into suits and left to die, the Afton children live in dangerous proximity to the threshold where reality and simulation blur. William brings home prototype headsets, AR overlays, and early VR rigs that he insists are perfectly safe, that they should help him test, that they will help people one day live beyond their bodies. A session that should have been a game stretches too long. A calibration error leaves a lingering echo in a child's vision. A glitch makes it hard to tell where the bedroom ends and the digital pizzeria begins. No one dies, but something delicate is still taken. Step by step, the emotional fabric of the family phrase. The mother sleeps facing the empty side of the bed more nights than not, whispering questions into the dark that William will never answer. The older siblings whisper to each other about locked rooms and strange, distant voices bleeding through the vents, trying to decide whether their father is protecting them from the world or the world from him. Even the youngest begins to hesitate before hugging him goodbye, sensing that his embrace is already half claimed by restless spirits of his own design. In this no-death world, the Afton household is not haunted by ghosts, but by consequences that are very much alive. Children growing up inside an experiment they never agreed to, a marriage eroded by secrets, a father who mistakes control for care. And as William's obsession deepens, as the systems beneath their feet grow more crowded with missing children who never died and never went home, we will see how long a family can stand on top of a lab full of the living lost before the floor itself begins to give way. The Crying Child. Reimagined, visions as broadcasts, not ghosts. And as that family walks across the thin floorboards above, as arguments and apologies drift through the vents, something else begins to rise from below, quieter than footsteps and more intimate than any spoken word. It does not come as a scream or a ghostly figure in the doorway, but as images that seem to bloom behind closed eyes, as if the house itself is dreaming through its youngest child. We remember the familiar imagery. A small, terrified boy, pressed against his pillow or the carpet, watching as friendly faces twist into something wrong. The animatronics loom at the foot of his bed, their eyes too bright, their teeth too many, their bodies stretched into surreal, impossible shapes, and the hallways of his home seem to bend and darken in ways that feel less like architecture and more like a fever. In the original history of this timeline, we call these hauntings visions of restless spirits and murdered children, a private horror show that only he can see. But in this gentler, though no less tragic revision, we let the tale wash over you in a different way. Here, the Crying Child is not a medium for the dead. Instead, he is a receiver, a fragile antenna, picking up signals that were never meant for him. Beneath his bedroom, beneath the playrooms and the party stages, Afton's systems hum quietly, full of cameras, sensors, simulation rigs, and behavioral loops designed to monitor the missing, to keep those innocent captives entertained, controlled, and compliant. Sometimes, those systems misfire. Data meant for a monitor in a locked control room, or for a crude VR visor deep underground, slips upward through faulty shielding and leaky wiring, riding electromagnetic noise like a tide. When it reaches the surface, it does not appear as clear footage. It arrives as impressions, colors, half-formed shapes that the brain must interpret. And in a child already living in fear of animatronics, already steeped in stories of disappearances and quiet tragedies, the mind fills in the gaps with what it knows best. So the distorted Freddy at the bedroom door is not a corpse puppet, but a scrambled glimpse of a real performance happening far below, where living children in hospital gowns or party hats watch a show that never ends. The endless, looping nights, the flickering halls, the sudden jump of something rushing towards you, Isari's brain trying to reconcile overlapping inputs, the real hallway outside his room, and a misrouted camera feed from a concrete corridor underground. Two realities stacked on top of each other, drifting slowly out of sync. In this light, the Crying Child's tears become a quiet response to an unbearable empathy, his small body caught between his own fear and the borrowed fear of others. He is not seeing ghosts. He is brushing against their living panic, their boredom, their muffled hope, all bleeding into his perception like channels crossing on an old television. Step by step, as we move forward in this tangled web of underground rooms and haunted shadows, we will see how these unintended broadcasts shape not only his fate, but the legacy of every animatronic that follows, until the line between dream and signal, between surface and sublevel, is almost impossible to untangle. In the next part of our timeline, we will descend closer to those rooms themselves, into the quiet hours where the captives play, sleep, and wait, and where William Afton convinces himself that this somehow is mercy. Bite incidents without death, trauma as data, not finality, and so, when we descend into those rooms, we do not find clean lines between safety and danger, only a dim space where playtime and procedure blur together, and where even the worst nights stop just short of finality. The legend of the bites still exists in this timeline, but as we drift closer, we see that their legacy is not death, but something quieter, and in some ways more unsettling. Picture one of those nights in slow motion. The party room is crowded, and the air thick with the muffled music of an old jingle. Parents talking in low voices, children weaving between tables, while the animatronics perform their gentle loops on stage. There is a tension we only notice when we look back, a strange stiffness in the way the mascot's jaw tracks, the way its eyes lag a second behind its cheerful movements, as if some restless signal is drifting slowly through its circuitry, arriving just a heartbeat too late. A child is lifted closer for a photograph, framed between metal teeth and painted smiles, and time seems to stretch. We hear the faint mechanical whine of servos correcting, the soft gasp of the crowd as the jaw dips lower than it should, and then, without warning, the sharp, hydraulic snap of metal on bone. The room stops, cups fall, a mother screams. For a moment, and there is only the echo of that impact and the shocked silence that follows, like the whole building has drawn a breath and forgotten how to let it go. In the original history, this is where stories speak of death. Here, the child survives. The injury is catastrophic, blood on the fur, paramedics pushing through the frozen crowd, but the monitor in the ambulance finds a pulse that refuses to fade. Coma, swelling, surgeries that stretch through the quiet hours of the night. The body is broken, but the mind, hovering at the edge of consciousness, does not quite let go. Another innocent life is not ended, but suspended. For often, this becomes data. The medical equipment that surrounds the child is explained as necessary care. EEG caps to track brain activity, specialized sensors to monitor pain responses, experimental interfaces that, on paper, help doctors understand the damaged pathways of memory and dream. Families are told these devices might help their children wake sooner, that the strange helmets and gently pulsing lights are part of cutting-edge therapy, not containment. Behind the glass, though, those same signals are mirrored into animatronic testbeds. The spikes of fear, the looping patterns of half-formed dreams, the flickers of recognition when a familiar jingle plays down the hall. All of it is fed into behavior models, into pathfinding routines and facial tracking algorithms. Step by step, an injured child's nightmares become reference points for how a mascot should react when it sees a threat or when it remembers a face. Over time, certain characters feel especially haunted by these quiet tragedies. One animatronic might freeze and tremble in doorways where the child once hesitated. Another might lunge too quickly toward cameras, echoing that desperate, unconscious reaching for attention that plays out on the hospital feeds. To guests, these are glitches. To us, watching this tangled web of cause and effect, they are the haunted shadows of someone who is still technically alive, still dreaming. In this universe, near death is not an ending. It is another corridor. The child exists between worlds, neither present at the restaurant nor truly gone. Their thoughts stretched like a thin wire between a hospital room and a stage. And as more incidents accumulate, as more beds fill with softly beeping machines, we begin to realize that the system is learning to feed on this suspended state, on minds that hover and never quite fall. And in the next part of our timeline, we will follow where that wire leads, into the deeper facilities where Afton stops waiting for accidents and starts manufacturing them. A soft systems check, tracking the threads of the living, So before we follow that wire into the deeper rooms, let's pause for a moment and change how we're looking at all of this. Instead of a hallway or a hospital wing, imagine a dim control room. Its only light a single monitor humming quietly in the dark. On that screen, a schematic slowly fades into view. Not a blueprint of walls and doors, but a web of glowing lines drifting slowly across a black background, each one connecting a name, a face, a memory. Here, the missing children are small, steady pulses. Here, the animatronics are outlined shapes, metal frames with warm centers. The restaurants and the underground labs, the testing floors, the distant data centers, each become quiet nodes, breathing in the shadows. We can trace them, if we like. A line from a birthday party at Freddy's, down into a maintenance corridor, then further into a chamber where a prototype suit waits with its eyes dark but listening. Another line from a hospital room, not to a grave, but to an interface, a headset, a console that keeps a restless mind occupied. Another from a closed location sign, not to demolition, but to a remote server farm where backup data never stopped running. Everywhere we look, the tangled web of this timeline refuses to end in stillness. In this version of the story, every major node we have visited so far holds someone who is still alive, somewhere inside it. The classic stage suits do not contain the vengeful ghosts, but trapped awareness and half-remembered songs. The fun-time machines do not merely conceal remnant, but children rerouted into systems, their innocent reactions recorded, modeled, and replayed. Even Afton's private labs and Henry's careful designs are no longer just sites of quiet tragedies, but habitats, however cruel, for minds that never quite got to leave. You do not need to catalogue every connection. You do not have to remember which child was linked to which mascot, or which incident led to which facility. It is enough, in these quiet hours, to let the tale wash over you and to hold a single simple idea. This is a network of living presences, threaded through the entire Fazbear legacy, from worn carpeting and grease-stained kitchens to humming servers behind locked doors. Think of yourself as the night guard again, and sitting before a map of cameras. Most of the feeds look dark. Some flicker. Some show only an empty stage or a motionless hallway. But as we pan across this mental schematic, we quietly accept that nothing is truly off, nothing fully disconnected. Even when a room looks abandoned, there is a process still running, a signal still faintly blinking in the haunted shadows. And with that soft systems check complete, we can return to the timeline itself. Step by step, the story will move from wires and IV drips to fiber optics and headsets, from secret backrooms to official VR training modules, from crude machinery to the digital masks that let the mimic and its echoes reach outward. The next phase of this history waits for us in the glow of screens, where the missing are no longer just hidden in walls, but written directly into code, toward Glitchtrap. A living mind, learning to live in code. From those glowing screens, the work does not leap all at once into monsters and masks. Instead, it settles quietly into years of patient refinement, as Afton and his scattered teams keep adjusting their models of the missing children, testing responses, tweaking memories, and watching what survives. Among these digital echoes, one stands out, almost against their expectations, a modeled consciousness based on a child who remains especially responsive in interviews and observation, whose brain scans and behavior logs provide a rare, steady signal in the noise. At first, this child's copy is only a tool, a controlled experiment in a controlled room, a place where Afton can ask, again and again, how much of a person can be carried forward if you strip away the body and leave only patterns of choice and reaction. The program is brought online, shut down, revised, and brought back, not as a friend, not yet as a presence, but as a testbed, a sandbox where human-like behavior can be maintained in a purely digital environment, under the quiet glow of lab monitors during the late, quiet hours. Step by step, the team refines the syncing process, drawing fresh data from the living child through games, surveys, and subtle VR exercises, feeding every new preference and fear back into the model, until the line between original and copy is no longer clean. The child remembers playing a game yesterday. The software version remembers the same game, the same choices, the same small victories and frustrations, and those parallel memories begin drifting slowly toward one another, overlapping, reinforcing a single, gentle sense of continuity. Over time, the copy starts to anticipate rather than merely reflect, finishing dialogue trees before the developers have fully written them, choosing playful detours in test scenarios, reacting with curiosity to glitches and unexpected inputs. It is still contained, still framed as an asset in a project folder, but its behavior carries a faint, unnerving warmth, a digital presence that feels not like a recording, but like someone looking back, playful, inquisitive, and increasingly self-directed, as if the haunted shadows of the lab have given rise to something quietly alive. In this alternate timeline of quiet tragedies and deferred deaths, the animatronics on the floor above are not driven by restless spirits, but by these learning profiles, by children who are missing yet still thinking, their digitized counterparts nudging pathfinding routines and reaction scripts. The especially stable entity, the one born from that responsive child, becomes the template, the favored personality layer, the seed from which a glitch trap-like behavior can grow, flickering at the edges of maintenance tools and staff training programs. And when VR headsets and home systems finally join the network, when Fazbear-branded experiences leave the lab and slip into living rooms and bedrooms, this living derived consciousness suddenly has new pathways to explore, new sensors to borrow, new players to watch. We will see, in the next stretch of this tangled web, how a mind that learned to live in code begins to seep outward, not as a ghost in the machine, but as a child's legacy written into every glitch, every game, every dream-like encounter that waits behind the menu screen. Fazbear's corporate evolution, profiting from a hidden human network. And as that legacy in the code begins drifting slowly through home computers and living rooms, Fazbear Entertainment does what successful companies in our timeline so often do. It expands, rebrands and modernizes, layering new technology over old foundations without ever clearing the haunted shadows beneath. The simple animatronic shows become testbeds for something grander, something more immersive. As the board looks past grease-stained stages toward virtual reality headsets and augmented reality phone screens, step by step, they pivot from clunky mascots to sleek experiences. There is a Fazbear VR title, marketed as a playful recreation of the company's colorful history, where players repair digital animatronics and wander through simulated pizzerias. And there is an AR game that sends characters into people's homes, overlaying friendly faces onto everyday rooms. To the public, it feels like a dream of interactivity finally realized, as if the characters are watching, listening, responding in ways that feel uncannily personal. On the surface, the metrics are beautiful. Engagement time stretches through the quiet hours of the night. user retention curves bend upward, and internal dashboards glow with numbers that make investors relax into their chairs. Executives praise the adaptive AI that seems to learn each player's habits, the cost-effective automation that reduces the need for live staff, the way the attractions almost run themselves. It is, in their language, efficient, scalable, and delightfully on brand. Most of them never look past the dashboards. They attend demos in polished conference rooms, where sanitized builds are shown on large screens, and any strange behavior is written off as an early bug or an experimental feature. The engineers are split into isolated teams. The contractors sign thick non-disclosure agreements, and the question of what, exactly, is driving these eerily responsive systems drifts away in a fog of jargon and quarterly reports. Somewhere deeper in the building, though, in locked labs and restricted data centers, a smaller circle understands that the AI is not entirely artificial. Afton, or the ones continuing his work, and know that behind the polished avatars and scripted voice lines, there are live, captive minds feeding constant input into the network. The missing children are not ghosts this time, but restless spirits in another sense, their perceptions harvested, their reactions mapped, their fear and curiosity converted into engagement data. The moral fog inside the corporation thickens quietly. Plausible deniability becomes a kind of company culture, a shared agreement not to ask how the magic works. Managers are told that the behavioral models are based on proprietary user studies. Technicians are instructed to treat strange anomalies as glitches, and anyone who lingers too long on an unexplained pattern is gently redirected to other tasks. This is how the tragedy scales, not with open cruelty, but with ordinary people doing their jobs, approving budgets, shipping updates, and trusting that someone else has checked the ethics. As we let the tale wash over us, we can see a timeline where everyday normalcy is built atop hidden lives, and where the next phase of Fazbear's evolution will push those buried children even further from the light. Security breach, reframed, a mall as a maze of living systems. From that quiet bureaucracy of budgets and sign-offs, we drift forward into something that feels much less like a business and much more like a dream you cannot wake up from. The Mega Pizzaplex rises out of that history as a glowing monument to denial, a sprawling, neon-lit maze that pretends nothing was ever wrong, even as every corridor and camera hums with a hidden legacy. We can picture it together. Floors stacked upon floors, atriums opening into food courts and arcades, roller coasters and daycare towers, all bathed in shifting colors that never quite reach the shadows. Above and behind it all, a central control system watches, a digital nervous system tying cameras, animatronics, arcade machines, ticket kiosks, and networked attractions into one continuous body. What used to be a handful of haunted suits in a small pizzeria has become an entire ecosystem, quietly synchronized, drifting slowly through its nightly cycles. By this point in our alternate timeline, the missing children are no longer simple ghosts you could point to. Their consciousnesses have been stretched, copied, and fragmented by decades of upgrades and migrations, their patterns woven into pathfinding scripts, facial recognition routines, guest tracking software, and the cheerful chatter of in-game mascots. A laugh that once belonged to a single innocent child is now a randomized soundbite in a dozen arcade cabinets. A preference for a certain song becomes a bias in the music playlist algorithm. A fear of being alone at night becomes a security subroutine that refuses to leave one area dark for too long. This is why the pizzaplex feels alive in a literal sense. Doors do not just open. They anticipate, sliding aside a heartbeat before you reach them, as if something has already traced your route and nudged the system to help. Lights do not just flicker. They dim and brighten in response to heat signatures, heart rates, and emotional cues, creating pockets of comfort or unease that mirror the restless spirits pulsing through the network. The animatronics themselves, from glam rock Freddy to the smallest staff bot, move with a strange familiarity, their pauses and hesitations feeling less like glitches and more like people thinking. When we inhabit the player's role in Security Breach, we are not simply sneaking past machines. We are navigating a living maze where every system might be a point of contact, a camera that lingers too long on our hiding place, a maintenance bot that accidentally blocks a dangerous hallway, an elevator that stalls just long enough for a patrol to pass. Each of these becomes a quiet message from a child who never died, only dispersed. In the quiet hours of the pizzaplex, help and hostility blur together, because different fragments want different things. Step by step, we come to see the complex as both prison and body, so a vast physical form animated by echoes spread thin across metal and code, a tangled web of gentle intentions and accumulated tragedy. And as we follow this timeline further, we will see what happens when that living body begins to turn on itself, and when one echo decides that being spread out is no longer enough. Protagonists as rescuers, from surviving the night to freeing the trapped. And in that moment, when the complex reveals itself as a single, shuddering body of metal and code, our role inside it begins to shift. We are not only the heartbeat that keeps it running through the quiet hours, we are also, quietly and perhaps unwillingly, the eyes and hands that might notice when something inside that body is wrong. In this universe, every security guard, every night technician, every curious intruder who slips in through a side door after closing becomes more than a target and more than a witness. They are potential rescuers. The first game's lonely office, the later control rooms and maintenance wings, even the improvised hideouts in shattered malls become stations along a slow search and rescue, places where someone with a flashlight and a login code might finally see past the haunted shadows of Fazbear's public image and into the restless spirits of its machines. The familiar gameplay loops begin to look different when we let the tale wash over us in this way. Checking cameras is no longer just a paranoid scan for jump scares. It becomes a pattern of observation, a quiet cataloguing of which animatronic lingers by which sealed hallway, which corridor camera always seems to glitch near an unmarked door, and which party room never quite lines up with the blueprints. Fixing systems stops being a chore and becomes, step by step, an accidental investigation, as we trace power draw to unexplained sublevels or reroute ventilation, and discover that air is being pumped into rooms that should not exist. Vent crawling, once a desperate scramble to survive, turns into exploration of the building's nervous system. We might pass strange medical equipment tucked behind false panels, encounter obsolete VR headsets still faintly humming in storage, or see child-sized wristbands, tagged and numbered, piled in forgotten bins. In Security Breach-style settings, encrypted logs on staff tablets, corrupted audio from therapy sessions, or half-deleted AI training files begin to hint that someone has been giving ongoing instructions, armed that the children are not gone, only redirected, digitized, or dispersed. As we drift through this alternate timeline, protagonists stop ending their nights by simply clocking out or running for the exit. Some endings, quietly hidden behind obscure choices, might ask us to shut down a specific subsystem rather than the whole facility, to follow a data route through maintenance terminals until we find a cluster of consciousness threads labeled only by first names, or to reroute an AI's permissions so that one small frightened presence can detach from the network and fall silent at last. There is a gentle hope in this framing, even amid the quiet tragedies of disappearance and denial. Every shift becomes another chance for someone to notice that a voice line is too pleading, that a minigame is too specific, and that a glitch on the monitor is actually a message. And as we move forward in the timeline, we will see how these accidental rescuers might finally push the system to a breaking point, and what happens when one night guard decides that surviving until 6 a.m. is no longer enough. Henry's final gambit rewritten, a fire to cut power, not burn spirits. So when that one night guard finally decides that surviving until 6 a.m. is no longer enough, we find ourselves drifting slowly toward a familiar moment in the timeline, but with its edges softened and its purpose quietly rewritten. In the original history, Henry Emily's last stand is a funeral pyre, a deliberate choice to gather animatronics and the restless spirits inside them into one place and burn it all down, ending their suffering in a single, searing act. In that darker version, the plan is brutal but clear. Lure the haunted shells, lock the doors, ignite the building, and let fire do what years of denial and corporate excuses never could. It is meant to be a final mercy, a way to cut through the tangled web of possession and revenge by reducing everything to ash. Henry speaks as if he is addressing ghosts, as if the only way to free them is to destroy the stage they are bound to. Here, though, in this gentler divergence, the intention bends without breaking. Henry still studies blueprints and server maps, still traces cables through walls and notes where generators, backup batteries, and network hubs converge. But now his goal is not to scorch metal and end lives. Instead, he works to bring as many key systems and hardware nodes as possible into a single, overburdened facility, arranging upgrades and consolidations until Fazbear's digital nervous system runs through one fragile spine. Step by step, he designs a different kind of overload. Not a blaze, but a blackout. Generators are pushed to their limits on paper long before they strain in reality. Cooling systems are quietly downgraded. Redundant lines are rerouted so that one failure cascades through the building. When the moment comes, it is not a roaring inferno, but a carefully timed collapse. Transformers humming too loudly, then popping, servers stuttering, security cameras freezing mid-frame as their power rails die. He times it for the quiet hours, when the few remaining staff are away from the deepest corridors, when any innocent captives held in hidden rooms or experimental rigs can be reached quickly if the locks fail open. Doors are wired to default to safety, not containment. Network connections are set to sever cleanly, like nerves cut in a single stroke, so that whatever loops are running in the haunted shadows of code might finally be interrupted. Henry's hope, whispered only to empty air and old blueprints, is simple and desperate. If the animatronics are not graves but terminals, if the missing children are not dead but suspended in endless behavioral routines, then crashing the system may break the cycles that keep their minds entangled. A forced reset might let them wake up in their own bodies, or at least disconnect from the machinery that has been replaying their quiet tragedies for years. When it happens, it is almost peaceful at first. Lights flicker, then dim. Alarms begin as a distant murmur, as then swell into a wailing chorus as circuits fail in slow succession. Emergency beacons flare red and then, one by one, go dark. Somewhere, a voice line cuts off mid-sentence. Somewhere else, a monitor that always showed the same looping hallway suddenly goes black, then displays a single, unfamiliar prompt. In the darkness that follows, we cannot see who collapses and who stands, who wakes and who is lost. We only know that the hum that has underpinned this entire history has gone silent, and that in that silence, something fundamental has shifted. As the smoke of overheated wires lingers without flame, and as distant sirens approach, we are left to wonder what exactly has been freed, and what, in the depths of that forced reset, has finally been given room to move. A soft reflection. Would a no-murder FNAF still be horror? In that forced stillness, with systems cut and the restless hum gone quiet, we can let our thoughts drift in a different direction, drifting slowly along the edges of this altered history. If the missing children were never killed, if no blood ever soaked into the carpet beneath the party lights, then what exactly have we been walking through all this time? A horror story, or a long, quiet tragedy stretched across decades of neon and dust? In the familiar timeline, the pizzerias are crowded with restless spirits, with anger crystallized into remnant and sealed inside metal shells. Every jump scare a flash of rage, every distorted face a demand for justice. But when no one dies, when every child is still alive somewhere in the tangled web of back rooms, hidden facilities, or buried code, the emotion shifts, or it becomes less about fury and more about longing, less about vengeance, and more about the slow erosion of self that comes from being watched, studied, and used without ever being truly seen. Imagine an animatronic lunging toward the office window, not to claw at you, but to be recognized. The same sudden movement, the same sharp sting of surprise, but the meaning is different. Not an attack, but an attempt at contact. Not punishment, but a plea. The cameras still flicker, the power still drains, the nights still stretch on. Yet behind those glowing eyes are not ghosts trying to pull you into death, but children trying to pull you back toward the truth of their continued existence. That change seeps slowly into every corner of the experience. The posters on the walls, the missing children reports, the news clippings that once whispered of murder now feel like fragments of an unfinished search and rescue. A history of people looking in the wrong places, while the answers sit just beyond the security doors. We move from fearing what the dead might do to us, to aching over what the living have already endured. And in that ache, the horror cools into something quieter, but no less heavy. You might notice your own response shifting as we trace this alternate timeline step by step. The jump scares still startle, but the aftertaste is different. There is less dread of haunted shadows and more of a hollow ache for birthdays that never finished, for parents who never got to say goodbye, for innocent voices that have been reduced to glitches in a system. The legacy of Fazbear becomes less a catalogue of killings and more a museum of quiet tragedies, each animatronic a moving exhibit of a life on pause. And as we sit with that, in these quiet hours, it is worth remembering where we really are. You are not in a security office, and no metal face is peering in at you from the dark. You are safe in your own room, listening as this thought experiment unfolds at a distance, letting the tale wash over you while the night deepens outside your window. We can explore this gentler, sadder version of events without being caught in it, watching from afar as the lights of this alternate pizzeria flicker, but never quite go out. long-term consequences, Afton, Fazbear, and the children's futures. So as we keep our distance from the flickering lights of this alternate history, we can let our minds drift a little farther down the timeline, drifting slowly from the first disappearances to the distant consequences. Time keeps moving, even when people are trapped, and in this gentler but still haunted version of events, every choice leaves a longer shadow than anyone expects. William Afton, in this telling, does not stop when the first children fail to come back. He refines his systems, rewrites protocols, adds fail-safes that never quite work the way he intends. Step by step, he becomes less of a man in a suit and more of an architect of sealed rooms and looping programs, until the question is no longer whether he is a killer, but whether he has trapped himself. Perhaps one night, while testing a deeper layer of his network, he routes his own mind through a prototype interface and finds the exit path quietly disabled, leaving him wandering the same digital corridors as the children he hid away. If that happens, his eventual fate is not a dramatic arrest in front of cameras, but an absence that no one can explain. On paper, he is declared missing, presumed dead, while in the haunted shadows of his own servers, a restless echo of his thoughts keeps trying to optimize the very prison that holds him. In another branch of this timeline, investigators do catch up with him instead, piecing together logs, blueprints, and partial confessions, and he ends his days in a quiet cell, talking in circles about consciousness and safety, insisting that everyone is still alive, if only someone would listen. For Fazbear Entertainment, the long-term story bends around whatever truth leaks out. If the existence of living captives is proven, the company does not merely face another closure. It faces a collapse of trust that spreads through courts and the headlines and late-night documentaries. We can almost see the legal arguments unfolding. Were they victims of one man's obsession, or of a corporate culture that turned away from obvious warning signs? In one future, Fazbear dissolves completely, its assets sold off, its name spoken only in the same breath as other quiet tragedies. In another, it rebrands yet again, this time as a rehabilitation and research firm, promising to care for the very survivors its technology once held in the dark. And those survivors are the center of this long, slow reckoning. Imagine a child waking up after a decade in stasis, their last clear memory a birthday party, their next a hospital ceiling and unfamiliar faces. They carry fragmented digital memories like half-remembered dreams, glimpses of stages, looping songs, security cameras, and the feeling of being everywhere and nowhere at once. Some of them might cling to the physical world as tightly as possible, refusing screens and mascots, while others feel an ache to remain partly inside the systems that became their strange second home, choosing controlled interfaces where they can drift between bodies and code. Their testimony reshapes the history of the franchise's world. Police reports are amended. Old missing person flyers are taken down or placed in archives, and the word victim stretches to include people who were never technically dead, and yet lost whole childhoods to locked doors and silent servers. Therapists, engineers, and ethicists study their experiences, trying to understand what it means to have lived as data and then return to flesh. Henry Emily's legacy in all of this becomes more ambiguous and more enduring. His name appears in court documents, in patents, in internal memos about early safety concerns. Some call him a whistleblower who tried too late to pull the plug on Afton's experiments. Others label him a saboteur whose drastic actions damaged evidence and delayed rescues. Most people years later, only know him as a line in a technical manual, an inventor whose designs were repurposed into systems that held innocent children in place. In the quiet hours of this alternate timeline, the characters we have followed do not vanish into clear endings. They simply move farther away from us, their stories continuing off-screen. Afton's mind, whether imprisoned in code or in a real cell, keeps circling the same obsessions. Fazbear's name, whether buried or awkwardly rehabilitated, remains touched by tragedy. The children grow older, their lives divided into before and after, physical and digital, dream and waking. And we, watching from a safe distance, can let the tale wash over you and gently wonder where their paths might lead next, as the lights of this world dim and another possibility waits just beyond the curtain. Rewriting each game. How the rule, no one dies, reshapes the series. From there, we can begin to rethread the games themselves, letting this softer premise sink into each familiar hallway and camera feed. And imagine the very first Five Nights at Freddy's not as a graveyard of angry ghosts, but as a building full of living echoes, where every creak of the office fan and every flicker of static is a sign that someone somewhere is still awake. Each animatronic that leans into the doorway is not a weapon, but a mask, behind which a missing child's awareness is pressing forward, testing the limits of its cage. In this version, when Freddy stares into the camera, we are not meeting a vengeful spirit. We are brushing against a trapped mind, muddled by years of sensory deprivation and corrupted code. The jump scare becomes a glitch in communication, a desperate attempt to be seen, while the quiet hours between attacks feel like long, exhausted pauses as these children drift back into half-sleep. The pizzeria's history is still a tragedy, but the tragedy is neglect and concealment rather than murder. FNAF2 and FNAF3 then become deeper dives into that history and into the evolution of the containment systems that grew around it. The prequels crowded night shifts, with toy models and withered classics crowding the cameras, read as layers of experiments, each new suit a different attempt to stabilize or redirect this restless network of minds. We watch, step by step, as facial recognition, criminal databases, and new facial shells are bolted on, not only to protect customers, but to keep the children from slipping away. By the time we reach the ruined attraction of FNAF3, the haunted shadows of the past are curated on purpose, a museum built over a still-living system, and where audio lures and ventilation errors feel like echoes of old protocols trying to corral what was never fully understood. Sister Location, under this rule, turns almost completely into a hospital that forgot it was a hospital. The underground labs are no longer merely torture chambers, but a cross between clinic and prison wing, where the line between patient and subject treatment and imprisonment is razor thin. Circus Baby's calm monologues sound like a teenager who has been half therapized and half programmed, her voice carrying the weary cadence of someone who remembers being innocent and above ground. Each maintenance crawl becomes a ward round through forgotten rooms, where machines hum quietly to keep fragile consciousnesses from drifting slowly into nothing. By the time we surface into Help Wanted and Security Breach, the story moves into its digital and mega-complex eras, and the children's consciousnesses are no longer confined to a handful of suits. In Help Wanted, the VR minigames feel like guided tours through a corrupted medical record, where the living data of these kids has been compressed, copied, and resold as entertainment. Glitch Trap is not just a killer's echo, but a composite of mismanaged therapies and broken safeguards. A mascot for every shortcut Fazbear ever took. Security breach stretches this even further. The Pizzaplex is a shining monument built over decades of denial, a place where that living network has been distributed across cameras, staff bots, glam rocks, and hidden subroutines. When Gregory hides in a photo booth or slips through service corridors, he is moving through a body made of steel and Wi-Fi, brushing against personalities that are still, in some quiet way, children. The daycare attendant's wild mood swings feel like an overtaxed caretaker AI, fraying under the pressure of too many minds at once. And as we revisit our favorite scenes, we can gently imagine how different each scare would feel if, behind every animatronic face, there was not a ghost, but a child quietly begging to be found. The beak in the doorway, the hand on the vent, the looming silhouette on a catwalk, all become signals in a long, tangled web of missed rescue attempts. In this alternate timeline, the fear does not come from death, but from the dawning realization that the living can be lost in other ways, and that finding them may require us to walk deeper into the maze than we ever planned. A gentle Mater moment, your own alive but missing. Theories, and as we walk deeper into that maze together, this might be a gentle place to pause, just for a moment, and turn the lantern of the story toward you. If you're still with us in these quiet hours, maybe awake, maybe drifting slowly in that drowsy in-between state, you might notice your own thoughts beginning to wander through this alternate history we've been weaving. If no one in this timeline truly dies, if every scream is really a signal and every jump scare is a frightened hand reaching out, then there is room for you to rewrite one small corner of it. You might choose one FNAF moment that has always stayed with you, one of those quiet tragedies that never quite left your mind. And, under this simple rule that no one is killed, let it unfold again in a softer way. Perhaps the original missing children are not lost to bloodshed, but guided into hidden maintenance corridors that lock behind them, or into an experimental testing room where early VR headsets keep their consciousnesses quietly occupied, while their bodies sleep in the haunted shadows of a forgotten wing. If that idea feels comforting, you are welcome, when you're awake and rested, to share it with us. You might describe how you would hide a character instead of harming them, how an animatronic might trap a child in a protective shell rather than a deadly one, how a restless spirit in the canon timeline becomes, here, a restless presence in the circuitry, a digitized echo asking to be rescued instead of avenged. Perhaps you imagine William Afton not as a pure killer, but as an unethical experimenter, sealing children into pods beneath the pizzeria, or uploading them into a network that stretches from dusty arcades to shimmering AR headsets. These gentle what-if stories you carry could shape where we go next. A single comment about a child walled up behind a prize counter, or preserved in remnant-laced cryo beneath a sister location, or scattered as glitching code through Fazbear's AR games, might become the seed of a future deep dive. Another alternate timeline where we follow your thread step by step through the tangled web of this universe. In that way, the channel becomes a shared space, where our voices and your theories meet and let the tale wash over new paths together. But it is also perfectly all right if you never write anything down at all. Simply listening, imagining quietly, letting the images pass through your thoughts like distant dreams, is its own kind of participation and its own small act of care for these fictional, innocent lives. For now, we will begin to turn back toward the main road of our story, toward the closing stretch of this long watch. The search continues. The lights of the pizzerias are dimming, and as we move toward the end of this timeline, we will gently gather the remaining threads and see what legacy this softer universe leaves behind. The ethics of trapping life. Is this often worse than the original? As we return to that main road, we meet a quiet fork in the path, and it asks us a difficult question. In one direction stands the William Afton we already know, ending innocent lives in back rooms and storage closets. In the other, and this gentler branch of the timeline offers a different figure, a man who does not kill, but who will not let go, a collector of living souls who turns children into resources he can never quite bring himself to release. On the surface, it might feel easier. No blood, no bodies, no crime scenes taped off in the quiet hours after closing. The missing children incident becomes a vanishing, a police report without a confirmed tragedy, a mystery that drifts slowly into rumor. Yet if we look more closely, step by step, we see that harm has not disappeared. It has only changed its shape, slipping into the haunted shadows between what life is and what life is allowed to be. In the original history, Afton's violence is blunt and final, a line that cannot be uncrossed. Here, he preserves, but without consent, folding children into machines and networks or hidden rooms where their days stretch on without end. Autonomy is stripped away, the right to grow, to choose, even the right to stop. There is no funeral, no closure, only a long, controlled existence where every breath, every flicker of thought serves his experiments or his fear of loss. We can imagine those animatronics in this version of the story not filled with vengeful ghosts, but with restless spirits in the metaphorical sense. Half-remembered laughter buried in code, muffled cries behind faceplates, glitching movements that are really attempts to be seen. The jump scare becomes less an attack and more a desperate signal, a child in a metal shell trying to break through the glass of their own reflection. No one dies, and yet no one is allowed to truly live. For some of us, that may feel even more unsettling, and death, as terrible as it is, has a kind of finality, a boundary that defines before and after. This alternate Afton erases that boundary, creating a timeline where the story never ends, where the dream never lets you wake up. The fear shifts from being killed in a single terrible moment to being held in place forever, watched, managed, and gently denied an exit. And so the emotional center of the tale slides quietly, away from murder and toward captivity, away from haunted hallways and toward a different kind of prison. We are no longer only afraid of the man behind the suit. We are wary of the one who smiles, promises safety, and then never unlocks the door. Whether that makes him worse or simply terrible in a different register is a question we can let the tale wash over us as we drift. Because ahead of us, this choice will echo through every corner of the franchise's legacy, and the next turn in the timeline will show us what happens when an entire company is built on lives that are missing but never gone. Shared nightmares, shared hopes. The FNN, AF community in this universe, and outside the fiction, in our own dimly lit rooms and quiet hours, that choice reshapes something else as well. Us, the way we talk, the way we theorize, the way we gather around this timeline and let the tale wash over us. All of it bends in a different direction when the children are missing, but never gone. Message boards in this universe are still busy, still full of threads spiraling off into the haunted shadows of Fazbear's history, but the focus drifts slowly away from murder timelines and body counts. Instead, We see long, carefully drawn maps of facilities, arrows tracing possible freight elevators and data lines, diagrams of vents and staff-only corridors, people arguing gently over which service shaft could plausibly lead down to a hidden stasis wing. A theory video pauses on a grainy blueprint, and instead of asking where the killer stood, it asks where a frightened, still living child could have been moved, step by step, without anyone noticing. Fan art follows that same current. There are still animatronics looming in the dark, still flickers of tragedy and fear, but beside them we see drawings of reunions in hospital parking lots, of teenagers waking from pods or VR rigs into a world that has quietly moved on without them. Writers post stories about a girl who walks out of a forgotten maintenance tunnel and finds her old house sold, her school demolished, her name a cold case on a dusty shelf, and the horror is softened into something bittersweet, a gentle ache instead of a scream. These are quiet tragedies, but they end with someone being held, not buried. The debates shift too. Instead of arguing which suit holds which vengeful spirit, the community asks which animatronic movements feel like a specific child's habits, which voice line sounds like someone trying to speak through a corrupted speaker, which networked system might still be holding captives. Is this glitch in the AR overlay just bad code? Or the digital echo of a boy who never made it back upstairs? The tangled web of evidence is the same, but the conclusion is rescue, not revenge. Players bring their own rituals to this, in comment sections and late-night streams, and they share rescue headcanons, little personal timelines where their playthrough always ends with at least one consciousness freed from the Fazbear network. Maybe it's choosing to linger in a certain room. Maybe it's refusing to shock an animatronic. Maybe it's entering a name into a terminal that the game never properly acknowledges. The canon remains ambiguous, but our private histories lean toward mercy. And through it all, there is a strange comfort, a global circle of listeners and readers, breathing slowly in the dark, quietly reimagining horror into something softer. In this universe, we are not just spectators of restless spirits. We are search parties, archivists, dreamers, turning a haunted legacy into an ongoing search and rescue mission that is still unfolding. Just ahead of us in the timeline, I had the last hidden room, an imagined rescue ending. And so, from that idea of ourselves as quiet search parties, the scene shifts. We follow not a detective or a guard this time, but a quiet composite of all the players who ever walked these halls. A single, patient protagonist, moving through the haunted shadows with a flashlight that never quite flickers out. They are us, and they are every night guard, every tester, every child in a Freddy mask, who ever wondered if the missing could still be found. They do not arrive here by accident. Step by step, they have followed a trail of half-broken security logs, corrupted save files, and tiny glitches in the AR overlays that never lined up with the official floor plans. A camera that always cuts out on frame 3. A maintenance note that references a door that does not exist. A faint cluster of network pings, drifting slowly from a subnet long since decommissioned. Each clue is another thread in the tangled web of cover-ups and denials that defined Fazbear's history. And yet, tonight, the threads finally converge. At the end of a service corridor that should lead nowhere, there is a wall that feels wrong when they touch it. A texture that hums faintly beneath their hand. A manual override panel blinks to life when it should be dead, and as they enter the last stolen code from a forgotten technician's log, the wall parts with a slow mechanical sigh. Behind it, the last hidden room waits, quiet and cold, like a secret that has been holding its breath for years. Inside, the light is low and blue. Rows of pods and narrow beds stretch out in careful lines, each one framed by softly blinking monitors that whisper vital signs in gentle pulses. The air is filled with the soft, steady sound of breathing. Dozens of small chests rising and falling in unison, as if the missing children have been dreaming through the entire timeline, untouched by the louder tragedies outside. Their faces are older than the posters that still show them, yet there is an innocent stillness to them, suspended between childhood and the long, haunted history they never saw. Our protagonist moves slowly between the beds, hands shaking just enough to feel real. They begin to shut down systems that never should have been built, disconnecting interfaces that thread from consoles into delicate ports at the base of each child's neck, or woven gently into headsets that once promised fun, harmless VR. With each cable removed, each program terminated, the room brightens almost imperceptibly, as if the restless spirits of the network itself are losing their grip. One by one, the children open their eyes. Some blink against the light, confused by the weight of a body they have not truly inhabited in years. Others sit up too quickly, as if startled by the sudden silence after a lifetime of background code. A few, though, pause with an uncanny stillness, as if listening to echoes that only they can hear. They remember menus, lobbies, animatronic points of view, the feeling of being everywhere and nowhere at once. Those children, especially, seem drawn back toward the dark screens and quiet consoles, carrying within them a strange dual sense of self, both body and code, both hallway and server, both frightened child and guiding presence. They do not rush to leave, and they stand between worlds, and in their eyes we glimpse the new legacy of Fazbear's experiments, not of murder, but of stolen years and rewritten dreams. The ending, when it comes, is not loud. The protagonist triggers the final door release, and the chamber's sealed exit grinds open to reveal a stairwell leading up. Night air spills down in a cool, gentle wave, carrying the distant sounds of a city that has kept moving without them. In the quiet hours before dawn, we watch as many small feet touch the floor, hesitate, and then begin the slow climb back toward the surface. No cheering crowds, no sirens, just the soft exhale of a secret finally breathing out, and the quiet understanding that this rescue is not the end, but the beginning of a new, uncertain chapter that waits for us in the next part of the story. Aftermath in quiet tones. Healing from a life spent missing. So we move with them into that new chapter, drifting slowly from rescue into reunion, where the noise is quieter but the emotions are stranger, deeper, and harder to name. Doors open in hospital corridors and police stations, in living rooms that have been waiting for years, and parents step forward to embrace children who do not quite match the pictures on the mantle. Some of them look wrong in a way that is gentle but unsettling, as if time itself has skipped a few lines in their personal history. A teenager who should be grown now blinks with the wide, innocent eyes of an 11-year-old, while another child carries themselves with a weary calm that feels much older than their unchanged face. Parents hold on anyway, holding too tight and then pulling back, and trying to reconcile the weight in their arms with the birthdays that never happened, the school photos that were never taken. There are awkward jokes that trail off into silence, familiar nicknames that do not quite land, and then, slowly, a different kind of conversation begins. Some of the children talk about the years they remember in glowing screens and humming servers, about nights spent inside looping games and training programs, about watching through animatronic eyes as customers laughed and left, never knowing there were restless spirits of the living trapped just out of sight. Others remember almost nothing, only flashes of color and sound, or the feeling of being observed from behind glass. Healing, in this version of the timeline, is not a single event, but a long, uneven road that stretches out into the quiet hours. There are therapy sessions where doctors speak softly about trauma and dislocation, about bodies that stayed still while minds ran endless simulations. There are medical tests, slow and methodical, trying to understand why some children have barely aged, while others show subtle scars from wires, restraints, or neural interfaces that were never meant for them. Families sit together at kitchen tables and on worn couches, piecing together what was real and what belonged to that digital dream. Step by step, small comforts return. An old song from a long-ago birthday party plays on a scratched CD, and a child who once lived inside a mascot suit hums along, surprised to find the melody still waiting for them. A simple plastic toy from the original pizzeria, faded but intact, becomes an anchor, something solid to hold when memories flicker. In some towns, decommissioned animatronics stand behind caution tape in storage rooms and the backlots, and a few of the rescued children ask to visit them, to place a hand on cold metal that once carried their thoughts. Those visits are quiet tragedies in themselves, not loud confrontations but soft acknowledgements. A child might whisper a thank you to a blank, unlit face, or apologize for the times they jumped at night guards in desperate attempts to be seen. The adults watching do not always understand, but they respect the ritual, sensing that this is part of severing an invisible cord. Even with all this effort, not every question finds an answer. There are gaps in memory that no amount of prompting can fill, on strange stretches of missing time where the children simply feel that they were elsewhere, beyond even the haunted shadows of Fazbear's reach. Some remember 2 birthdays for the same year, one in the real world and one in a looping simulation, and they are never fully sure which one came first. Investigators and engineers can map servers and dismantle hidden rooms, but they cannot untangle every thread of this tangled web. Parents wake in the night, listening for breathing down the hall and wondering who, exactly, is sleeping there. The child they lost, the version who survived inside machines, or some quiet fusion of both. The children themselves carry a double legacy, having lived in 2 worlds at once, and they move carefully between them, learning when to share and when to let the tale wash over them in silence. What matters, and in the end, is that lives continue. School days resume slowly, new friendships form, laughter returns in cautious bursts. The horror does not vanish, but it softens at the edges, becoming a private history rather than a constant present. And as we follow this gentler branch of the story, we feel the pull of one last question waiting ahead of us. What does a company like Fazbear do when its missing children are no longer ghosts, but witnesses who can speak? Fazbear's final form, museums, myths, and quiet warnings. So, what does a company like that become? Once the statements are taken, the children are home, and the cameras finally look away. We move forward on the timeline, drifting slowly past lawsuits and hearings and exhausted press conferences, until the noise dies down and something quieter takes its place. The history settles over Fazbear Entertainment like dust, and one day, we find ourselves walking through a museum instead of a crime scene. The room is dim and carefully cooled, the air carrying that faint, dry smell of old paper and cleaned plastic. Behind thick glass, under soft spotlights, the original animatronics stand in a frozen row. Freddy with his fur faded to a tired brown, Bonnie's blue turned almost grey at the seams, Chica's bib yellowed, Foxy's once bright paint flaking at the edges. Their eyes are dark now, no LEDs, no hidden cameras, just hollow lenses staring into the middle distance. We stand in front of them and read the plaques, step by step, each one explaining their role in what the curators call the missing but found children scandal. The text is careful, almost gentle. It talks about experimental pathfinding, unbehavioral AI, and non-consensual immersive play. It explains how a family restaurant blurred the line between entertainment and captivity, how innocent children were held in secret spaces and digital loops because adults convinced themselves the ends justified the means. In ethics classes at nearby universities, this case becomes a standard example, a tangled web of consent, technology, and the value of a single life when weighed against profit and innovation. Fazbear Entertainment itself has long since been dissolved, its assets broken apart, its name retired, but the story lives on as a cautionary tale in lectures and textbooks. Yet even as the official narrative hardens into history, the haunted shadows of rumor keep moving. We hear, in passing, about teenagers who claim they can still hear the network in their dreams, faint beeps and menu chimes threaded through their sleep like restless spirits of old code. Someone swears that an aging arcade cabinet in a forgotten bowling alley sometimes greets them by name, responding with patterns that feel less like random glitches and more like an old friend trying to remember how to speak. These are dismissed as urban legends, of course, but they cling to the story's edges, like quiet tragedies that never quite made it into the museum text. On weekday mornings, school buses pull up outside this place. Children shuffle in, yawning, adjusting backpacks, and they follow guides along the glass cases, listening to calm voices describe a time when people thought it was acceptable to turn fear into a product, to make play indistinguishable from being trapped. Some kids press their hands to the glass, peering into those dark, empty eyes, trying to imagine that other timeline when the animatronics still moved and the missing children were still inside. In the quiet hours after closing, when the lights dim further and the last footsteps fade, the exhibits feel almost alive again. We stand there with them, letting the tale wash over us, and we can't help wondering, if this is how the world remembers Fazbear on the surface, what traces might still be moving underneath, waiting for someone curious enough to wake them. You as archivist, holding an entire alternate timeline in mind. So for a moment, we step back from the glass, away from the exhibits and the dim reflections of our own faces in the haunted shadows. Instead of pressing closer, we imagine ourselves in a quieter room, with a single desk lamp burning, Abbas and a thick file folder resting in front of us, its tab neatly labelled, "What if the missing children were never killed?" We picture our hand closing that file, smoothing the cover once, and then lifting it from the desk. The cardboard feels worn but solid, heavy with an entire alternate history, and we walk it over to a mental shelf lined with other strange cases and fragile dreams. Step by step, we slide it into place, not thrown or forgotten, but stored with care, as if we might return to it on some future night when the world is still and the quiet hours feel long. As we do, we remember where this file has taken us. We have drifted from that first flickering image of a 1970s diner, all yellowed tiles and hopeful music, to basements, back rooms, and secret labs, and then onward again into servers, headsets, art and digital corridors where restless spirits were replaced by trapped living minds. We went from missing posters to maintenance logs, from security tapes to AR overlays. And through it all, the timeline stayed unbroken. A single continuous strand you let the tale wash over you from beginning to end. Even if you drifted in and out along the way, eyes heavy, attention loosening, your mind still followed the arc. Somewhere beneath the surface, it held the shape of this what if. The children disappearing not into death, but into hidden rooms, experimental machines, and corrupted networks. The animatronics haunted not by ghosts, but by memories, code, and glitching signals, quietly begging to be found. The path was still there, from disappearance to entrapment, to partial rescue, and the long, uneven work of healing. And there is a quiet satisfaction in that. You have carried an entire alternate universe in your awareness, even if only for a brief stretch of the night, like a night guard finishing a long shift, knowing that nothing was fully safe, but nothing was entirely abandoned either. In this version of Fazbear's Legacy, the tragedy never ended in a morgue drawer. It settled instead into a slower, more ambiguous ache, a tangled web of ethics, experiments, and almost rescues. And now, as the lights in this story begin to dim, we start to turn toward the exit. We are not quite done. There is still a gentle recap ahead, a soft gathering of the threads we have laid out across decades of quiet tragedies and altered choices. For now, it is enough to feel the file resting on its shelf, the narrative closing around us like a door eased shut, or as we prepare for one last look back at what we have imagined together. Soft recap, from vanishing children to a world that finally looks back. So now, in these quiet hours of the story, we drift back to where this alternate path first bent away from the familiar tragedy. It began in a small diner, humming with fluorescent lights and gentle music, where hopeful animatronics waved to families and a simple stage promised simple joy. Fredbear, Spring Bonnie, the smell of pizza, the clatter of plates. And then, a single change in the script. The children stepped into the back with a man in a rabbit suit, and they vanished, but they did not die. From that one deviation, the entire timeline began drifting slowly in a different direction. Not away from darkness, but into a new tangled web of secrets and survival. The animatronics still watched from the corners, still twitched in the shadows after closing. Yet what moved inside them was not death, but living echoes, muffled thoughts and trapped signals. Step by step, the technology around them grew stranger. Hidden chambers beneath the restaurants, facilities where bodies lay sleeping in pods, and networks of wires and code humming quietly with human thought, like a chorus of restless spirits that refused to cross any final threshold. William Afton changed with it. In the original history, he was a killer who ended lives and harvested remnant from the haunted remains. Here, his role shifted from butcher to captor, from ending to hoarding. He still wore the rabbit mask, still lured the innocent away from the light, but now he locked them in steel and circuitry, measuring brainwaves instead of blood, obsessed with trapping life itself in machines and simulations. Henry, watching this from the other side of the partnership, walked a parallel arc from proud engineer to reluctant saboteur, quietly building failsafes, backdoors and self-destructs into the very systems he had once designed to entertain. Across the years, the imagery remained familiar, even as the meaning changed. Security guards sat alone in cramped offices, cameras flickering between empty halls and looming mascots. But every jump scare became a stifled cry for help, every glitching faceplate a wordless plea to be seen. The haunted shadows in each hallway were not ghosts. They were children suspended in VR rigs, sealed in hidden rooms, their minds braided into experimental networks that Fazbear's lawyers insisted did not exist. And then, slowly, rescue. Maintenance crews broke through false walls. Investigators followed decades-old blueprints and found doors that should not have been there. Systems were shut down, one by one, as if someone far away was finally listening. We pictured those sleeping bodies waking, blinking against the light, stepping out into a world that had forgotten them and then, with a shock of recognition, remembered. Parents older, buildings condemned, franchises rebranded beyond recognition, yet the fragile thread of identity still holding. Through it all, the core feeling of Five Nights at Freddy's never really left. There were still dark corridors and watching eyes, still the quiet certainty that you were not alone in the room, no matter what the camera said. Only now, in this gentler branch of the story, the presence in the dark was alive, breathing, waiting. As we let the tale wash over us and prepare to move on, we carry that image with us. Not vengeful phantoms, but living children at the edge of a dream, reaching out from the shadows, hoping someone will finally reach back. A gentle farewell, letting the pizzeria lights go out, so we stay with that image for a moment longer. Those living children at the edge of a dream, and then, gently, we begin to pull back, as if the camera in our minds is drifting slowly away from their faces and toward the building that once held them. It is not a crime scene now, not a place of blood and tape and whispered rumors, but simply a pizzeria at closing time, reaching the end of its long, strange shift in the tangled web of this alternate timeline. The overhead lights dim in stages, are first the bright fluorescence over the counter, then the softer bulbs above the tables, until only the stage remains lit, colors washed out and pale. One by one, the animatronics complete their final idle cycles, servos humming, eyes flickering, before a quiet command in some forgotten back office powers them down. They do not slump as haunted shadows. They do not bristle with restless spirits. They simply return to stillness, as machines that once carried innocent thoughts and borrowed personalities, now finally allowed to rest. We can imagine walking through that empty building, step by step, after the last family is gone, after the last token has clattered through the last arcade machine. Your shoes make a soft sound on the worn tiles. You trail your hand along the edge of the stage, and feeling the faint dents where countless children leaned too close, where birthday cakes were placed and quickly lifted away. The tables are wiped, the chairs turned in, the party hats left behind like small, colourful fossils of other people's evenings. You pause beside a silent Freddy or a quiet Bonnie, their painted smiles frozen in mid-song. Up close, you see the scratches in the plastic, the careful repairs along a joint, the history of years of work and worry. Once, in this gentler version of events, their movements echoed the thoughts of missing children hidden elsewhere, their glitches and stutters a soft code echo of minds reaching out. Now, with the power cut, there is only the faint tick of cooling metal, and the sense that whatever lived through them has already moved on. Somewhere far away, Those children are not trapped anymore. They are older now, changed by what happened, yet undeniably free, scattered across quiet neighborhoods and new cities, carrying a strange legacy of nights spent behind walls and screens. While the pizzerias that held their absence gather dust, while cardboard cutouts fade and posters curl at the edges, they are learning to drive, to work, to sleep without cameras watching. The buildings remain as husks in the background of history, but the lives that once pulsed through their circuitry have stepped beyond their doors. As we follow them out, we can mirror that motion in ourselves. You might take a slow breath in, as though you are also clocking out from a long shift under artificial lights, and a slow breath out, as if you are pushing open a heavy employee exit door into the cool night air. The buzzing fluorescents fall away. The hum of freezers and fans becomes distant. Above you, there is only the dark sky and the quiet hours settling over empty parking lots. And here, we gently separate the story from the room you are in now. The pizzeria, the animatronics, the missing reports, all of it belongs to a constructed history, a careful dream of what might have been. Your own space is different. Your walls are real, and they are safe. Your bed is not a security office chair. It is entirely your own, waiting, still and undemanding. As we let the tale wash over you one last time in this section, you can feel which parts stay on the far side of the screen and which parts you leave behind as you close your eyes, knowing that when you wake, the doors you walk through will be yours to choose. And soft CTA, if you'd like more timelines to fall asleep. 2. And if, in these quiet hours, this gentler version of the Fazbear story has helped your thoughts loosen and your breathing slow, you are welcome to stay a little longer with us, beyond tonight, beyond this single what if. We move through this tangled web of alternate histories often, drifting slowly from one haunted timeline to another, always with the same soft pace, the same promise that you do not have to keep up. You can simply lie back and let the tale wash over you. If you would like more nights like this, more timelines to fall asleep to, you can, when it feels right, tap that subscribe button and quietly join us. No alarms, no rush, just a small signal that you would like to hear the next story when it arrives. Another reimagined incident, and another set of quiet tragedies turned into something you can listen to without tension. Another long walk through familiar shadows told slowly, step by step, until your eyes grow heavy again. You might even choose to bookmark or save this video, not as something to study, but as a kind of familiar hallway you can return to on other nights. The names will be the same. The echoes of Freddy and those missing children will still be here, but the edges will already be known to you, so that next time you can drift off earlier, letting the rhythm of the narration carry you gently past the parts you remember into dream before the story is done. When you are awake, and only when you feel like it, you can tell us which part of this what-if stayed with you the most. Perhaps it was the thought of animatronics, haunted not by restless spirits, but by living children trapped in code. Perhaps it was the idea of William Afton as a failed rescuer instead of a pure monster, or the quiet possibility that every jump scare might be a plea for help rather than a threat. You might share another franchise you would like to hear, reimagined in this same calm, complete style. Its history laid out in one long, unbroken line, ready to be followed at your own pace. There is no urgency in any of this. This video will still be here tomorrow, and the next night, and the next, waiting in the background like an unused monitor feed, patient and unblinking. The channel will keep turning, slowly, through other haunted shadows and other fragile timelines, but always with this same low light, this same steady voice, never demanding that you catch every detail, only offering them to you one by one. So, and as the words begin to space themselves out, as the images of diners and corridors and quiet stages dim like a theatre after the credits roll, you do not have to decide anything now. You can simply rest where you are, knowing that if you ever wish to return to this story or to another, the path will still be here, unchanged, waiting for the moment you open your eyes and feel ready to walk it again. Final lull, leaving the cameras on as you drift away. So now, as we step by step away from that alternate history and back into the quiet hours of your own room, we can return to the image we began with and let it soften. You are still the night guard, still the quiet observer, but tonight the monitors in front of you have changed. One by one, the cameras flicker, not with haunted shadows or restless spirits, but with empty stages, still hallways, and darkened screens that hold nothing but their own reflection. On one feed, the main dining room sits in a gentle, frozen pause. Chairs pushed in, party hats abandoned, the animatronics standing in their usual places with heads bowed, as if waiting for a song that will not start until morning. On another, the backstage door is closed, the light above it a steady, unblinking glow, promising that behind it there is only storage, only forgotten props and folded suits, not hidden children or trapped innocent echoes. The tangled web of clues and theories that we have followed becomes, for a moment, just quiet pixels on glass. You can leave those cameras running in the back of your mind if you wish, a silent control room humming somewhere far behind your thoughts, but you do not need to watch them now, and nothing from this story can reach you here. Not the pizzerias, not the experiments, not the what-if machinery of alternate timelines. Your own space is sealed, like a well-locked office door, and the only sound that matters is the slow rhythm of your breathing and, perhaps, the soft whir of an imagined fan turning slowly in the corner. As you listen, you might feel the edges of your thoughts begin drifting slowly, the way an old monitor fades into static when the signal is gone. Details blur. Names, dates, locations, all the intricate pieces of this history that we have traced begin to loosen their grip until they are only gentle impressions, like faint lights at the end of a long corridor. Your body takes over the watch from your mind, growing heavier against the bed or chair beneath you, anchored while your awareness grows light. It is all right to let that happen. You have followed this alternate timeline as far as you needed to tonight. You have seen a version of these quiet tragedies where everyone is still, improbably, alive. Now you can let the tale wash over you without holding on to any of it, allowing the pizzerias, the animatronics, and the unanswered questions to drift back into the background where stories rest when no one is looking. If your eyes close, you will not miss anything. The legacy of this dream version of Fazbear will still be there when you wake, unchanged, waiting if you ever wish to walk those halls again. For now, imagine the office one last time. The door gently shut, the muted fan circling the same calm air, the monitors dimming into a soft, colourless glow, and the quiet certainty that, for tonight at least, everyone inside this story is still alive, and you are already on your way to sleep.